So I was thinking today about how Donald Trump is a genius. I talked about it a little bit on the show we just recorded, and I think it's a good one. But there's a lot of talk about like Trump's smart or dumb, and I think when you're talking about like the stuff that you're supposed to be doing when you're president, traditionally, like the job is theoretically supposed to contain. No, he doesn't care about that stuff, and so it doesn't matter. Trump. I mean, if genius is the ability through application of will and ability shape the world into some warped version of the world of the way you want to see it. Like I would say the genius is when you are able to grab reality through some application of some ability, mental or physical, and some skill, and some just in a deep, bottomless desire and drive towards it. A combination of those things is genius, as we define it. That's how I define it anyway. Donald Trump is a genius who applied his genius to the singular task of being famous. And if you want to get simplistic about it, it's because his dad never loved him. And honestly, that seems cliche, but you know, a lot of the times it can be that simple. I mean, when you see his pathological, lifelong need to be recognized by others because of this hugely indulged ego that centers a complete absence and a terror of being bad, of being insufficient, of being unloved, and madly he seeks through his whole life to have people talking about him, reflecting well on him, so that he can fill that hole. And he drove himself towards the goal, the singular goal of being famous. However it happened was incidental. Like, he wasn't a genius at business. He was a very bad businessman. But he didn't have to be good at business. In fact, his business plan was being famous. He got so famous that once his ability to actually manage businesses was revealed to be non-existent and he started going bankrupt, his name was too valuable to let him actually lose any of that fucking position or equity. Because if he didn't own it, well, then who the hell did? And then debts get called in and the whole thing falls apart. And so his name became this thing that could also be used as a money laundering front. And then he also was able to drive himself towards becoming an actual game show host. And that's why he's president. And then he ran for president because he was being talked about, but in a negative way. And it drove him crazy. He needed to drown out that negative thought. And he did it by running for president. And he wasn't trying. And what I'm trying to say is that Donald Trump is a genius because this man who doesn't know or care about any traditional element of becoming a politician, either from the point of view of having a political philosophy, caring about anything politically one way or the other, having any coherent political beliefs at all, and then trying to apply them to any subject, from economics to civics, ethics, anything. Nothing. And then also just like the job of being a politician, of like conforming to sort of the media ecosystem in such a way that you like maintain homeostasis. You don't create too much sparks and tension and hostility. The way that you're able to stay under the radar and stay viable by massaging, you know, all the instincts, all the stuff that goes into being a politician or a policymaker of any kind, or a human being. He puts no effort into. Singular pursuit of fame meant that he became president by accident. He did a thing that some of the brightest minds of American history have sought with their entire body and spirits. Many of them have been dashed against the rocks of their own ambition. Few of them have miraculously made it to the ascent to the top. All of them powered by this gnawing need to be the president. Trump just wanted to be the most famous person in the world, and that just meant, and eventually led him to, by definition, becoming the president of the United States, who is generally the most famous person in the world. So he wasn't trying to be president. He was trying to be the most famous person in the world, and by seeking that so successfully and singularly, he accidentally became president. So Trump's not stupid. What's stupid is any system that could produce that result. Any system that would create a political structure that would incentivize and select for being psychotically good only at drawing attention to yourself. But we bungled that. That ship sailed. But I honestly think Trump's done for. And today, honestly, more than any polls I've seen, and there have been some really eye-dropping ones, or eye-popping ones. One that showed that Trump won people who said they disliked both candidates by almost 20 points in 2016. And right now, people who say they dislike both candidates prefer Biden by almost that much. Like, those are the late breakers. And the late breakers last time went incredibly far for Trump, way out of proportion, even to historic trends. That's not going to happen this time, almost by definition, because he's the incumbent, and traditionally incumbents are not the choice of late-breaking voters. Late-breaking voters tend to break against incumbents. And then you have the fact that Trump is, people dislike him more than they dislike Joe Biden. Unless you're a real psycho Trumpist, you don't really hate Joe Biden. And honestly, do they even really hate Joe Biden? He's Sleepy Joe. They have to make up the idea that he's a puppet of Antifa, but most people don't think that because he's Sleepy Joe. So they don't even really hate him enough to like drive it successfully. And yeah, the COVID spike, I mean, it was predictable. People all said, brace for a second wave in the fall, because that's how these things work. And yeah, here it is. I mean, we never got it's our third wave because we, unlike the rest of a lot of other countries, allowed they never really ended the first wave and created like a second wave in the summer. That's the real Trump difference, is that, and you might honestly though, if it turns out that we end up having this thing for years and we end up somewhere near here, like actual herd immunity just by incompetence and inability to do anything else, it ended up might not being a difference. Like this, you're going to have the same number of dead, just like maybe different names. But if there is some sort of Biden COVID plan that's going to turn us around, then I'm sure we'll see that. But the thing is, voters, even if they don't believe that's going to happen, they're going to pick it. They're going to pick not this, because they know this isn't working. Unless you already buy into Trump premises, this isn't working. But anyway, the real nail in the coffin for me, more than any of the polls, is the court ruling, specifically the one today by a federal court judge who is one of the most nakedly partisan judges on the federal bench, rejecting a Republican Party injunction request to have 100,000 plus Harris County votes invalidated because they were collected at a drive-through location instead of a fixed polling place. A classic, absolutely fraudulent basis, like prima facie ridiculous, but that doesn't matter. And the judge today, the last hope of this thing, he shot it down. And to me, this is confirming what I suspected, which is that there is now no question that the apparatus exists within the federal government, specifically within its judiciary, and its currently aligned state legislatures in key swing states, that if there is anything like a close election, the Republican Party has a veto override on the outcome. I think that's true. With Coney 2020 on the bench, I think they have that. The only question is, when would they press that button for Trump? And I say the answer is, they wouldn't. Okay, I'm back on. Okay, I'm back. I'm back. I've not been redacted. But I did lose my train of thought. What was I saying? Shit. Oh, why they're not going to go out. There's two. It's essentially a question of how much they'll be willing to stick their neck out. How much they're willing to break norms. Now, as I've said, all norms will be broken if they have to be. But it is like an emergency type situation. And will people in power in the Republican Party, specifically in this judiciary and in these state legislatures, where there's not as much scrutiny, like no one of them is ever going to lose their job because they failed to stop Biden from winning. People will just get mad at the deep state and the media and stuff, and they will not blame the GOP for allowing it to happen. I really don't think so. So they have the freedom to operate off of their self-interest as members of a party clique, which is what they are, which are independent from the interests of Trump and Trumpism, which is entirely based on his personal, not even political objectives, but personal like mood objectives. And that there's no reason that they would want to have to spend being the party in power during a giant recession and continued COVID crisis, dealing with this guy's ego is the sole basis for party policy, especially since they got what they wanted out of him. Judiciary locked up, the veto in place. If there ever comes a point, like say Bernie was on the ballot this time, and it was closer for some reason, and there's a few jump states, they would press that, they'd mash that button. You wouldn't even have, it wouldn't be a question of people mashing it. Everyone would come spontaneously to the decision, the self-interested decision, that this is what we're going to do. Just like there didn't need to be a big plan before the 2000 election. As soon as that ball got in the air and it was tipped, everyone knew what to do because everyone knew what the stakes were. At least the Republicans. Of course, the Democrats weren't doing that. The Republicans instantly knew what the stakes were. And that's all you need, is everyone understanding the stakes and moving towards those ends at the same time. Then you have a spontaneous judicial coup. And that will happen. But I don't think it's going to happen in this election. One, because I don't think it's in it for the average Republican judge or Republican legislator for Trump to win, really. Especially at the risk of deepening a political crisis that might eventually snap back in their face. Of course, there's no real reason to fear the current Democratic Party, but you can't guarantee what's going to happen in even the medium term, considering how deep the crisis is. I mean, some of these people know that. But the other one is that I don't think it's going to be close enough. You would need to have like the idea that's all going to come down to Pennsylvania. If that's the case, polling is not a thing anymore. And maybe it isn't. But I think you need extraordinary evidence to make a claim. So I'm going to hold off and say, for now, since I'm only predicting, and this is why predicting things is stupid, like it's an if-then situation. If polls are broken, then Trump will win. But like, well, are they? I don't know. No one knows. You can't know. It's insane. But yeah, predicting stuff, I talk about how like arguments online exist just to be had. And in some cases, I think people are aware of that at some level. And I hope people are aware at some level that like people predicting who's going to win, that is purely ornamental speech. But I don't know, the way people get invested in it and the way that like they're signaling something by which thing they're predicting and how that speaks to their like overall credibility and whatever, even though you're just talking about a snapshot of a moment and there's so many variables that nobody can have confirmed until we get some actual results. It seems like you're demanding too much of this as an emotional lodestar of conversation and concern about investing ideas about who it is. I speak for myself, but I see a lot of people stressing about this stuff. And I've tried not to do too much of it, but it is literally tomorrow. So I'm kind of psyching up because I'm going to have to talk about it a lot. And then, one way or another, I think there's going to be it's really interesting. So we're not going to get catharsis no matter what happens. No catharsis. But I also don't think an explosion. But I also don't know if we can continue the level of pitchedness without an explosion. I think the only way to square that circle is if there's some sort of just thwarted orgasm, ruined orgasm, as they say in the internet, and just sort of like a refractory period. I don't know. I just think everyone's still going to be miserable and tense. There's not going to be any kind of exhalation. But I was also like, even if Trump wins, there's not going to be some apocalyptic confrontation with the state. Even if Trump does a coup, there's not going to be that. There's going to be hyper-normalization. But how do we assimilate that at considering the level of tension? And the fact that people are literally running out of money. Running out of money. So there's a real material wick burning away in the background of all this cultural frenzy that the election is provoking. And that's the thing that's really driving it. Like, that's the actual engine. And it doesn't appear to be that there's any chance that it's going to be extinguished before it hits the fucking pile of dynamite. Lame dump Trump will be very fun. Lame dump Trump. Lame duck Trump will be funny. Very funny. I honestly think that if it's around 9 or 10 points, which I think is really reasonable at this point to think of as a popular vote gap, I think even with states not declaring right away, I don't think Trump's going to have anything like the ambiguity in the air to even get the wheels spinning, especially when you see these early decisions kind of setting the tone. So he's going to give it a go, I think. But the thing to remember about Trump, the most fundamental facet of him is that he is a coward, which means that as soon as there's a bit of resistance, he will crumble. As soon as he makes a half-assed request to the Joint Chiefs, and then they rebuke him, he will shrivel up like a fucking turtle dick. The famous turtle dick simile. Yes, I've got turtle dicks on the mind because I'm always not far from thinking about Mitch McConnell. It would be funny if he literally crumbled into dust as soon as the new Congress is inaugurated. He willed his body to stay together long enough to get the judiciary completely zipped up for a generation, and then he just transcended the physical fucking realm. Am I not, sir, at long last, turtly enough for the Turtle Club? Sir, I ask you, have you no sense of turtlehood at long last? I mean, people are going to go a little nutty. That's going to be interesting. But I see the vast majority of these suburban warriors everyone's kind of deciding to freak out about, they're not going to do anything. They're not going to do anything. You might see some of those awesome protests, where they drive onto the road and just park their cars. Just perfect. You can go to the drive-in and get a fucking get a soda and a burger, and then just sit there and honk your horn. What, they're going to storm state houses? They're going to raid armories? No, they're not going to do any of that. A couple of their more unbalanced kids might do some sort of Elliot Rodgers shit, but that's, at this point, that's just a background radiation of American life. And then, of course, you got to factor in domestic gladio. But I honestly think, for at least a little bit, I think that the powers that be are going to try to tramp down. Tamping up was good for a while. It was especially good when Bernie was going on. Tamping up was good. But now, especially considering how high it got, they're going to want to tamp down a little bit. So I wouldn't be surprised if the gladios got turned down. Although, instead of, or the gladios get busted more. And you get just a bunch of fake FBI entrapment stings like the one they did in Michigan to justify the state and turn the left around on the deep state, basically. Because, hey, we live in reality, and these institutions are the only thing standing between us and the ravening mob, the fascist hordes. I'm sorry. We have to corral them. It'll be very interesting to see how Q metabolizes a Trump loss. At this point, I'm sure most of them are too far gone to consider that, oh no, maybe this was a dumb idea. I think some of them will, because, not everybody's at the same level of commitment and imaginative, and emotional identification and transference to it, people internalize concepts like Q at a point where it's like an identity. And once that's the case, nothing can change it because it's too fundamentally existentially terrifying, because if you're not that, what are you? And that's a question that most people don't want to answer. So it will have to, for some good chunk of these guys, it's going to have to be turned into something else. And it'll be very interesting to see. Trump is occluded. Is he going off to summon God's angels and commence a righteous, wait for the sign of his return? I think that stuff might be, if it is just a modern day gloss on the evangelical Christ story, then it would make sense that it would culminate with a figure who essentially becomes the Messiah. Trump is no longer just, because for Christians, right, for self-identified Christians, their leaders are their ideas of Jesus, and that's one of the big reasons that people said that's so hypocritical for them to love Trump so much. But they view Trump as this embodiment of this embodiment of all that is worldly and corrupt, but who it has like a godly soul, which is, of course, the fate of all Christians who know deep down that they live debauched and fallen lives, that they are totally slaves to the flesh, slaves to the lives they have, that they don't really have a spiritual sense at all, and that they seek to transcend that shadow knowledge. And Trump going into occlusion, basically, him stepping down from power can become some sort of passion play that will presage a redemptive resurrection that will then finally abolish the distinction between the world of matter and the kingdom of heaven. So I'm looking forward to it if that happens. It'll be fun. Everyone has such opinions about daylight savings. I can't seem to care. I don't know. I like the fall back. I like the extra hour. I know people don't like that it gets dark early, but that doesn't really bother me. It's not like abolishing the penny, which I am much more passionate about. It's just a symbol of how the dependency bias of like a large bureaucratic state is genuinely infuriating. It's one of those things that you need to have like democratic controls on the mechanisms of state to prevent. Like when it comes down to it, the reason we still have pennies is because there are more people who are more deeply invested in the production of pennies than there are people who are even aware of like pennies as a stupid thing that we shouldn't have. Like, because it's essentially, I think the copper lobby or something wants to maintain demand. Is a lobby that keeps the bucket, that makes sure nobody even comes near the penny. And who's going to make the penny their priority? And that's what you would need. You'd need enough people to make the penny their priority, to make it a litmus test of involvement in government or politics. And that's just not going to happen because what is the vested capitalist interest in not having the penny? And since there isn't one, it'll just continue forever. And that is a small, silly example, but it's this rolling ball of gunk that fills every piston of governance. And people say that's like, oh, that's bureaucracy. That's the nature of the state. Well, no. In this case, in a lot of cases, it's the nature of capitalist capture of the state, like specific interest capture. That's part of the broader, assimilation between, like, ideally, I think from the liberal model of the state, not the way it is, but the way they theorize it, is that yes, they will admit maybe if you really corner them, all right, yes, the liberal government, liberal bourgeois government, it really is the executive committee of capitalism. But I'm a liberal. I think capitalism is good. And if we're going to have it, which we should have it integrated into a system of democratic check that can prevent the colliding and uncoordinated short-term interests of specific capitalist concerns from leading to a accumulation of inefficiency and waste more than anything that essentially make the government no longer functional, either and turn eventually government towards the specific interests or perceived interests of a smaller section of capital that maybe doesn't know what the fuck it actually does want. Maybe because it cannot see beyond the end of its nose, and it brings the whole edifice down. And they would say, no, we don't want that. We want a seamlessness there between the interests and checking the emergence of like specific capital formations taking power over the overall, mechanism of government. And conservatives point to that and say, no, look, this is bureaucracy. This is bureaucracy. This is the doom of the liberal this is the doom of the liberal conception of state. And liberals' only real response is, no, we got to just get rid of the corruption. But it's like, well, where? How? If the whole system is powered by money at every point, and it is just a piston response system of industries, engaging with industries and capitalist individuals in firms and such, and individually, like interacting with the government and producing outcomes that they want for themselves. Eventually, wherever there's more concentration of capital, there's going to be more concentration of influence. And that means there's no way to have the system that you're imagining you can have unless you eliminate profit and you eliminate capitalism from the mechanism and you clear that out of the pistons of the state bureaucracy. So that's like a central right-wing critique of like the liberal project. And once again, as with all these things, the finger points backward. It's not crony capitalism, it's capitalism. Capitalism becomes crony inherently, no matter what kind of equal playing field you're starting from. And of course, you're never starting from one. It just accumulates pockets that then self-deal. So that even your idealized liberal state will not be able to prevent specific interests from overwhelming any generalized interests. Because remember, the liberal idea is, sure, yes, it's capitalism. It's the executive board of capitalism, but capitalism is just the accumulated choices of people. That's the liberal idea. It's like, yeah, of course the market should be the total thing, because the market is the expression of choices of people. And therefore, what they want to do is what should be done, and therefore the state should just coordinate it and make sure that it can exist within like a safe space of like market transaction. But even on its own terms, it fails because of the unequal distribution of capital within industries and within interest segments and demographics that buckle it and turn it even away from your idealized notion of a general will that is expressed through market transactions. You got to get rid of the profit. You got to get rid of the capitalism. You have to socialize the surplus. You have to socialize the surplus. I would love to be an admiral. Someone said General Will, Admiral Matt. What was the other one? Who was Felix going to be? Colonel? Yeah, he's like those ops guys, they don't want to be on a desk, so they're not generals generally. Maybe a captain even. I'm definitely an admiral. I'm not really cold. It's in the 40s. It really is. I run hot anyway. And I grew up in the frozen wastes, so I generally don't get very cold. Can you see my breath? But I gotta say, a lot of people are wondering what's going to happen in the coming weeks and months. And I've decided, and it's going to be a little bit because I've made a few commitments. I now realize, in the immediate, going on some other shows to talk about what I think is going to happen. I'm really hoping, though, that like after sort of getting it out of my system following this, this specific pageant that we all get psychically fixated on every 2 years or 4, depending on your level of intensity of worship. Oh, yeah. I'm going to stop trying to predict anything. Because without the election coming up, there's nothing to peg it on. It's all vaguely in the future. And so there's less of a pressure to specifically opine on things going to happen. So I'm going to try as much as I can. I'm going to make a conscious effort to reduce my amount of predicting things. Because it really is, it's catnip. It's an analgesic for the brain. People are saying, is Chapo going to be funny under Biden? I honestly think it's going to be a whole new, I know this is self-serving, but if Biden wins, there's going to be some hijinks. Because, He's going to be president. You know? His brain is jelly. He is so out to lunch, and in a completely different way than Trump is, which means we're not going to get, you know, it's not going to be as boring. It's just very funny. And then the fact that they're going to have to dress up whatever, like, monstrous neoliberal regime they're going to do out in, like inclusive woke language, and the army of people who are going to try to do it on its behalf, and the number of people who are going to go from like prison abolitionists to like talking about working within the system and understanding like what the realm of the possible is. Oh, that's going to be finger licking good. Seriously, there are going to be so many people who couldn't support Bernie because he wasn't for reparations or some bullshit, are going to be fucking bending over backwards to defend this old white man imposing this austerity, authoritarian neoliberalism. It'll be worthy fodder for japes and amusements, I think. And the way they're going to like have Kamala out there to try to like remind people, hey, it's not this old skeleton. There's a new bottle. We're gonna do a ritual dance. Is like the spirit of the party is gonna infuse me, and now it's gonna be all bouncy and inclusive to match our messaging, even though the actual policy is the same cheese grater to the soul that we will be subjected to no matter what. Man, I gotta say that video of Schumer saying, I heard about this veteran who lost his job due to COVID and then got his house taken away and killed himself, and how as a result we're going to introduce legislation to require and fund local police to do self-harm interventions. I mean, this is the ratchet effect. It's like you make life intolerable, and then conditions of intolerability create, pathologies, and then you put all of your energy into fighting these things that are direct outgrowths of the system. Like, look at fucking France. Like, look at Macron. Macron is doing one of the most disgusting and cynical fucking pieces of politicking I've seen in a long time. I honestly say more like self-consciously evil than almost anything Trump's done. So the boy wonder Macron knows that he is on a knife's edge, that he is like the pinioned poster man for this unbridled neoliberal state that is like coming for the French way of life. Like, they're fighting, but they're coming for it, and the resistance to that is. It's not polarized from right to left culturally. Like, there's a big right-wing chunk of it, like the Front National, and then you got Mélenchon and stuff. And Macron knows that the French love picking somebody to fix this intractable crisis, not do anything, and then get really mad at them and throw them out. And he doesn't want to be that. He doesn't want to be chump bait. So what he is doing is he has decided to declare war on like a separatist Islam. In order to polarize that right-wing populism towards him, and and undermine the risk that the National Front and Marine Le Pen, Le Pen was the opponent in the runoff opponent to the winner in the last two presidential elections, and I think got a significantly larger vote the second time. He saw the writing on the wall, the arc of that, and he wanted to interrupt it. Very much like Cameron deciding to do a Brexit vote to neutralize UKIP. Cynical manipulation of a cultural problem that is caused by the fact that, there's like cultural issues with France in assimilating anybody, but there's this fundamental, perpetuating neoliberal austerity, and specifically the fact that like that French way of life was never really extended to Muslims who came to France, and they exist as a economic underclass. And these things cannot and will not be addressed. Instead, you hit the beehive with a stick to get everyone frenzied to essentially make any kind of class project impossible. And now, like, horrible shit's gonna happen. Like, a guy gets killed, a teacher gets killed, there's attacks, and people say, well, look at this. Isn't this proof he was right? It's like, well, he's right that there's a problem that he literally is completely invested in not doing anything about, except to profit from the creation of it. Monetizing the rot politically. Someone says, do I think that Chapo would have been funnier if Hillary had won? I know that that's what we thought at the time, because we had basically prepared for Hillary winning and had an idea what to do with it. I don't know. I mean, she's very funny, but she's also kind of, she's got X-Pac heat. You know what I mean? And yes, some of it is gendered. I'm going to admit, but it's not entirely. Like, Hillary Clinton has a transparent hatred that she hides behind this screen of fakeness that is so revolting, to me anyway. And yes, it's probably gendered to a degree, but it's I feel it like resonating like off like my feelings. And I don't know if that would have like made it less amusing over time, or if that would have made it funnier. I don't know. I do think we did pretty good making fun of giving the business to the old orange, the old mango Mussolini. The old Cheeto-in-Chief, the saffron satrap. I don't know, but we're gonna find out if making fun of the wokeification of neoliberalism will be as funny. I mean, I do think that the hairpin turn that's going to happen with the maximalist rhetoric around identity issues that has been whipped up, like the notion that we are in this like hellhole of white supremacy that requires immediate revolution and that you can't reform this. I think that is going to pop, and watching the fallout from that is going to be uniquely entertaining. And seeing the entire media try to act like not only is this decrepit old man some sort of civil rights icon and slay queen, but that he's not mentally incapacitated. Because you got to figure they're not going to be able to do. I mean, Trump proved that you don't actually have to do anything to be president. I mean, he watched TV all day. Like, they could put him in front of a TV; it wouldn't even have to be on. But you still have to give speeches, and you still have to do semi-regular contact just to like shape the narrative, because you're the one everyone looks to, and that's going to be a lot of stress on the brake pads. He's going to be smoking, and you'll have and the media will be very funny to watch these guys who spent the last 4 years, doing the whole resistance insurgents thing. Dissent is patriotic, deciding that the deep state, that the police power of the United States is now legitimate. Oh man, that's gonna be funny. Biden was pretty sharp in the debates. Although the first one he was really blown off the blocks by Trump, and then he had a very hard time centering his like stream of consciousness. I don't know. It's like next to Trump, I guess it's okay, but he really does get. You see in his eyes he doesn't know where he is. I guess I would say, and that happened multiple times during the debates. Like there's these moments when you're arguing. It's like, answer the question, and somebody will like have to be like, wait, what was the question? Because it was a long clause, he would have those moments, but you could tell it wasn't about what the question was. It was like deeper than that. It was, where am I? What is this? Like he was having to like collect himself more than just, what question were you asking? Like there's no adherence to anything other than the very narrow tunnel in front of him. He has this way that he like tries to name 3 things, and by the third one he just runs out of gas. He was talking about how Trump is inciting racial hatred, and he goes, praising Charlottesville, telling them they're very fine people, building a wall, telling Mexicans rapists, just going out there and doing all kinds of stuff. I can't get to a third specific example. Can't actually engage beyond just the most capaciously Nerf-like sentences and phrases that just, it's like somebody getting like a diamond ring in a giant box filled with packing peanuts. Like there's like the actual content of the sentences he says, even in a debate where people said he was good, are just these tiny little kernels, and it's just the rest of it's just packing peanuts. And I don't know how that gets better. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to have him step down, depending on how like the whole operation goes. I mean, maybe Dr. Jill Biden is the 21st century Edith Wilson. Maybe she's able to lock that shit down. Her and like her handpicked chief of staff are able to lock it down. I don't know. Maybe the Obamas take over. Maybe Rahm Emanuel is the man. Maybe the Clintons somehow stage a fucking comeback. Like Hillary sneaks in disguised as an intern. I do not think that he will run for re-election, that's for sure. As funny as that would be. And I also have to say, though, like, whatever adrenochrome-based therapies they have for these guys work well, because before the convention, I was half convinced, and a few times was able to fully convince myself, that they were going to try to switch him out because he was transparently not up for the job. I think eventually they realized that COVID kind of covered for a lot of it, and they were able to reserve him. They were able to keep him like on the battery saver mode in a way they wouldn't have been able to do. I mean, he didn't really do a basement. He was out and about, but like they were able to curtail it in a way they wouldn't have been able to do if it was a normal election. And maybe I didn't anticipate that how well that would go in terms of not hurting his polling. Like my assumption was him not being out there was going to hurt his polling, but nope, turns out he's the alternative. All these things are set. All this stuff's baked in. Nobody's really considering moment-to-moment changes, really, other than at the margins. And those people aren't really paying attention to, you know, how much he talks and what he sounds like and his record or anything like that. He's just the not Trump option, which I think is going to be the more popular option. And so they got him through. They're going to get him through Election Day. I don't know the rigors of the office. Like I said, it might not be rigorous, but it's going to be a question of the power dynamic that emerges in the White House. And that's the thing I can't know. So once again, I'm still predicting things. I'm still fucking predicting things. I said after the election, though. So the election still happened. It hasn't happened yet. I'm getting it out of my system. I'm trying to use this week to squeeze all the fucking toothpaste out of my tube and leave me a dry husk. You know, I think Jim Carrey's Joe Biden impression is actually a decent impression of Joe Biden. Like, he kind of has the same croaky voice and like some of the same intonations as him. The difference is that he is much more coherent than Joe Biden, which is why it's not a funny impression. And the reason it's not good as like an impression for something like SNL is because impressions are supposed to exaggerate things to make them funny. Instead, what Jim Carrey has done is he has taken all the absurd things about Joe Biden and sanded them down into a less terrifyingly incoherent, a friendly grandfather. Like, they literally had him do the Fred Robinson, the Mr. Rogers shit with the fucking, like, they're not trying to say, wow, isn't that, they're trying to like enforce that. That's manufacturing consent, because the SNL writers and cast are in an unprecedented fashion just clearly doing propaganda on behalf of the Biden campaign. Because they literally brought a guy in who's known for doing big, wacky, exaggerated stuff to do a version where Joe Biden is boringly coherent. And maybe he wanders off a little bit, Grandpa, but at the end of the day, he's still sharp as a tack. He's spry. I mean, that's serving a campaign function. Of course, maybe it's just the fact that they already don't really exaggerate anything about Trump for Baldwin, but that's because you can't exaggerate Trump. I think you can exaggerate Biden, or you could at least not do the opposite of humor. With the character, like this, they're trying to be funny with Trump. They're deliberately not being funny with the Biden impression. They're putting their fucking thumb on the scale. And the thing is, it's like, if you're a conservative, I can see why that's alienating and allows you to feel like you're oppressed. And if you're not oppressed, but I can understand why seeing like all of the TV stations, of which we only have a finite number, all the things that have like a cachet of mainstream culture and are accessible across like a broad demographic, are all in alignment against you. And I mean, that's why I can see why they go crazy over it. Yeah, like, that's why the good impressions of Trump, not mine, because I do try to exaggerate it, but I'm trying to just like I'm just trying to do a soul impression. People are trying to like make it sound like him. You can't make it sound like him more and make it funnier. You can just sound like him, and then it's what you talk about. And it's just doing it's having his words come out of the mouth of someone else. And about something else. Folks, can't do it. He's so good. Scooby-Doo. He's Scooby-Doo, but he doesn't do. If Trump wins, revolution? No. To put it lightly, no. The one thing I know is that if Trump wins, it will be by stealing it. But that no matter how, if he successfully steals it, it will be not metabolized as a coup. It will have a patina, a fig leaf of legitimacy enough so that as outraged as people get, they will, for the most part, talk themselves off of the precipice of doing anything about it. Because, at the end of the day, they are relatively comfortable. Only in the sense that they would perceive their precarity more than anything they could win out of some sort of apocalyptic confrontation with the state. But I think that anything that would like actually look like a coup to the point where it could not be metabolized, just canceled election, guns in the streets, that kind of thing, they wouldn't do that. Like I said, the forces that would do that are not invested in Trump enough to do it on his behalf, so it won't happen. Waukesha, Wisconsin. Fascinating place. So, Crucial Waukesha County, as it's called, is one of the GOP strongholds in Wisconsin. It is the county directly west of Milwaukee, and it is the white flight headquarters. It is where everybody went in the 60s once the blockbusting within city neighborhoods was successful. And they are very concerned about public transit out there. They really don't like the extension of bus lanes. They really don't like the idea of any metropolitan rail system. We had a mayor of Milwaukee who was like kind of a mini Daley there. He was mayor for like 16 years. His machine ran the city. His name was Norquist, and his single policy objective of his fucking 16 years in office was to extend some sort of light rail system connecting the suburbs to the city. And it was the providing political project of the generation of politicians that Scott Walker emerged out of, actually. The guys around Mark Belling and like the talk radio and like Waukesha County Republican political leader, formation. And they vote a lot. Their votes come in suspiciously late sometimes, and they often form the margin in a lot of like off-year races and stuff, like especially Supreme Court, which is lamentably elected in Wisconsin, which means for a long time right wing would just buy it by spending more on ads than the Democrats could raise. Once again, because they know the stakes. And but yeah, it's very racialized, as you could imagine. Milwaukee being one of the most violently segregated big cities in America. I think #1 by many metrics. I went to college there. But of course, like it's been diversifying a little bit recently. The irony of irony is there for me is that so Waukesha was originally a resort town. It had a system of hot springs. People would come and take the waters. And Albert Parsons, actually, one of the Haymarket martyrs, after the Haymarket bombing, fled Chicago, and he was hiding out in Waukesha before he turned himself in. But there was a water war with Chicago over the waters, from the hot springs from Waukesha. It saw like armed confrontations over people digging pipelines. And now, 100 years later, not only are the springs all gone, or if they, I sure as hell don't know if there's anywhere you can go and take them if you can, but the water table is contaminated with radon. And they want access to Milwaukee's water, the place that they fled, the county right next to the lake that has access and privilege to lake water thanks to the Great Lakes Compact, which is to prevent any areas outside the immediate contact area of the Great Lakes from accessing it in the coming thirsty times. And now they want, hey, you know, we like fled and took all of our tax money with us and, you know, created a hyper-segregated social corridor, sanitaire that we've heavily policed. Could we get some of your water, please? Ours is all gross. Well, the water war is between places that currently have access to Great Lakes, places that want it. Like, for example, fucking Arizona. Arizona wants Great Lakes water. And the Great Lakes Compact is a regional agreement to prevent that from happening. But I don't think that's going to stop it from getting privatized and purchased at some point. All right, guys. I hope everybody's excited for tomorrow. I hope everybody's ready to take a fucking potato peeler to their frontal lobe, one way or the other, metaphorically, by observing and absorbing and having wash over you the results of our magnificent democratic pageant. We will probably, I kind of think we will not have a call. There will be no check mark. There will be no call on election night because I think the media is so neurotically fixated on not accidentally helping Trump fucking do a coup that they're not going to do that. But I think that you will probably know before you go to bed who won. If it's Biden. That would be my prediction. And I would say that since I think, like I said, I think 9. Hi, folks. So, was there a vote last? What happened? Was there a sports ball? Oh boy. I've not really looked at anything. I looked at I streamed through stuff a little bit to find out just the general stake. It looks like it's going to be the Bush-Gore again. It's going to be Bush-Gore again. They're trying to stop votes from being counted. There's legal challenges. It's Bush v. Gore. It's a coin flip, though. I mean, I'd still, my gut says Trump pulls it out, but you know, Biden could still win. At this point, I realize the full stupidity and futility of predicting anything in politics. How it is totally futile. I'll explain more about that as we go on. But that's as much as I'm going to talk about. I'm not actually interested in that. Much like the debate, the first debate between Biden and Trump, where just the experience of it helped me sort of sear me into a deeper level that I've ever been able to like lock down my knowledge that there's no reason to listen to these guys talk because nothing they say means anything. Something you know deeply, but it's not accessible when you're dealing with it. And you end up getting caught up because you can't detach. And then that debate helped me detach. This election, another one of those moments where you are able finally, only in the aftermath of it, to look back and see what the hell you were even in the middle of. The owl of Minerva alights at dusk, as Hegel said. You can only know the fuck what was going on until afterwards, which is why the entire concept of predicting elections in the first place, the entire Nate Silver world, is an absurd and insane pursuit. It's a pure entertainment product. That's the thing. They pretend polls are supposed to be a science, but they're an entertainment product. And it's like, you have a choice. Do you accept the reality of that and then decide, I'm gonna, you know what? I'm gonna have some fun with this. I know it's an entertainment product. Let's do the horse race. Or you're going to be like, no, this isn't an entertainment product. This is actually real science, like Nate Silver. And then you drive yourself insane. Because if Nate Silver was smart, he would have realized that what he was selling in 2012 when he became popular was not expertise or specific scientific knowledge or anything. He did a thing that any fucking first-year statistics student could have done, which is just fucking aggregate polls instead of looking at one specific one. That's easy. He just specifically did it in a year where, by happenstance, you had a situation where liberals, still traumatized by the last election that didn't go their way in 2004, were absolutely nauseous at the thought of Obama losing to Mitt Romney. And they did what liberals always do before an election. They pull their hair out and freak out about, oh my God, we're blowing it, because they know in their heart they're fucking blowing it. And the thing is that they're always blowing it, but you know, it takes time for blowing it to really sink in, so you might still win a few elections here or there. And hey, maybe this is it. And they're like, oh my God, Obama's going to lose. And then specifically, when he lost the first debate, Mr. Obama, Mr. Smooth, Mr. Entertainer, ate shit in the first debate in 2012. Romney was seen by basically everybody as the winner. And that almost never happens to a Republican in a fucking presidential debate. And his numbers dipped a little bit, and liberals were tearing their hair out. And Nate Silver was the one place they could go on the website, the internet, to feel a soothing, cooling feeling instead of anxiety and freaking out. And oh my God, because they had Nate Silver there. Oh, to be poured over them like a holy gravy and to feel centered again. And then when he won, when Obama won, and it wasn't even really that close, and the one person who had told them and calmed them and petted them and kept them on the couch and sated and soothed like mommy's finger before that election was Nate Silver. And so they just decided to worship him. And dumbass Nate Silver, instead of looking at that and being like, oh shit, I got lucky, I better cash in, and then just like figuring out a new grift, decides, no, I actually know something and I'm gonna find out things. And so what happens? Oh no, those conditions don't obtain anymore. That was just happenstance that you provided that service for those liberals, that entertainment service for those liberals. Now in a midterm, when people don't really care as much, how do you make that interesting? Because they don't need to be soothed. And then 2016, it was the other way around. Everybody assumed Hillary was going to win. And so what did they need Nate Silver for? He was discarded like yesterday's toy. And he was freaking out about it and trying to like figure out, no, there's still a value add for me. And so what he could do is just say, unlike everyone else who says it's 95% Hillary, I say it's 75% Hillary. And then, of course, he felt vindicated after the election. And everyone else is like, you're an idiot. But once again, he was correct in a narrow sense. It's like, yes, there was a huge statistical voting error that was making everybody's predictions off. And he was able to recognize it more than almost any of the other aggregators were able to. That's still a value add, but it's not what they wanted. They wanted the oohs. They wanted the And now we're in the first election where nobody trusts polls at all, which means Nate Silver has nothing to contribute. They don't even remember why they liked him. And he's frantically trying to like find a way out of this maze, to find a way where he can give himself like a status as a scientist somehow, or an authority, when he is doing a thing that is fundamentally irrational and meaningless. When you say 75, what is it right now? Trump's up 4 in Michigan. No, he's not. That's not a thing. All of this is just, what is the general vibe like if an election happened today? And that means it means things in like, you know, a law of big numbers way, but it has essentially no, there is no, the amount of like objective scientific like attachment to the material reality is very, very tenuous to begin with. And then there's the fact that the end result is a binary outcome where your percentages mean nothing because it's going to be one or the other. So giving me a percentage is not an answer. It's not a scientific response to the thing because it's not a thing that's worth doing. It is not a science because there's no reason to do that other than to provide an entertainment for people. I mean, yes, polls are used to like guide coverage and stuff, but for the people who consume news, polls exist to provide entertainment, either or yay, boo. A little more for the pop and hiss of the political theater that we're living. That is the mug's game of predicting these things. And I felt, leading up to the election, I felt like every time I was prodded to talk about what I thought was going to happen with the election, anything from who was going to win to was there going to be a coup or was there going to be some sort of, all these questions were ones that are essentially like asking somebody, what's the polls say? It's like, I'm just looking at the polls, but I don't know if polls are real. We're not going to know if polls are real until the election happens. And now we know. Polls are not real anymore. And it's because I think, I don't know this, but I suspect, it's at this point, the only people who answer a poll are a person, are on one side of a coming divide I'm going to talk about within American politics that's now emerging between people who went to college and people who didn't, i.e., broadly speaking, people who see politics as a field of meaning, or people who see it as one option among a bunch of other options in an entertainment menu that they choose not to really engage with. And that means that those people are the demographic slice that everybody talks about and the Democratic Party is most fixated on, and is the majority of voters in that they're the ones who show up every 2 years. But then there's this other group of people who show up every 4 years. What is their thought? And I say those people do not fucking pick up the phone. That's what I say. I have no way of proving that, but it doesn't matter. It's just I'm just speculating on a hypothesis. It doesn't matter. What matters is that there is a systemic and now undeniable break that means you cannot think you know, unless you want to just be like assume, just like add a number or something. You know, at that point you're just pulling things out of your ass. And I'm very glad. And polling breaks another thing in me, and that is just to look at this to look at the voting outcome, look at what we're seeing with these returns, and seeing how it blows up a lot of our perceptions and understandings of how American politics operates. And honestly, I feel like in the last 4 years, like I feel like we breached out of a reality, out of like Earth A. When Trump won, we're like thrown into a quantum state where, whoa, that was a weird bump. That was like one of those things that there was in the arc of history, one of those moments that's one of those few moments that is both contingent and consequential. Because, you know, all events obviously are, you know, enmeshed with both of those historically. Most historical events are if they're consequential, they're not contingent. But there are a few, some assassinations, battle and war outcomes, big social like pivot points where you actually do have both contingency and consequence. And that put us in this quantum state of like, what did we run into? And then our response to it was going to be how we figured it out. And among people who are on the left, the response was, oh shit, battle stations. What do we do? Now, of course, the Democratic Party decided, it didn't decide, and I'll get to that later, but did what it was essentially programmed and required to do by its own internal algorithm, which was tack right, tack to the center, tack towards disaffected Republicans who were grossed out by Trump. That was inevitable and could not have been stopped. Nobody made a decision to do that. Any more than anybody wakes up at fucking Goldman Sachs and gets on the phone and says, hey, make more money today. No one does that. It's just, it's the underlying logic that you never even get to in a day-to-day conversation of motives and stuff, the deep, deep structure of ideology. But the contingent thing was the emergence of the Bernie Sanders concept, the social democratic alternative to the new Coke of DLC democratic politics. And so 4 years where people were manning ballot stations and trying to like, okay, we're in a new space, but what does it mean? All right, well, Hillary did terribly because they didn't talk about material issues, and the Democrats had gone away from labor, and we need to recommit to material politics, right? And you get a big quorum of people on the left saying, yep, that was it. And they said, all right, well, let's do it. And from certain assumptions, they operated. And one of the big ones was, we have to change the electorate. This electorate is trapped in this partisan box where these people are just biting each other's faces off because they're just bored suburbanites who are watching television. You have to have skin in the game in terms of feeling like changing society is something that needs to happen, and that your perception of your own self-interest is merged with a class of people. Like, oh, this is going to help me, but me as a group also. And so that's what Bernie did. That's what Bernie tried to do. Tried to operate off that big, huge bump in his popularity and people's awareness of him. And then he hit the streets for 4 years. We all operated off the assumption. And we operated the assumption that if you change the electorate, you enlarge the electorate. And if you enlarge the electorate, by definition, you will break through a lot of the structures that the Constitution and now later on gerrymandering and self-dealing by the GOP at the state level have erected against like popular participation in government, which would mean popular participation by working class people because there's more of them than there are owners. And those were the assumptions. And I held all of them. And I think basically everybody did until yesterday. And if they're not dropping them now, this is the point where you're like, you're fucking up. I don't blame anybody for accepting that that was the reality. I think everybody was operating off of that base assumption. And we weren't going to know until the election. And Bernie's primary defeat really signaled that, oh, maybe this isn't how this works. Because Bernie was able to get a good chunk of those Democratic voters, the young, engaged ones. And brought, and he did get some working class people who were aware enough of politics, cared enough about it, and knew who he was to believe who he was because he was so genuine. Like he read authentically in a way that only guys like Trump do, and which you need to actually break through like the kayfabe of politics to get at people who are not already invested in it. He was the guy. He was the potential. Like if anyone was going to do it, it was going to be Bernie Sanders. But the thing is, if he was going to do it, he would have been able to do it in a country where, in the smaller hothouse of the primary campaign, where you have individual states where you have turnout that is much lower than it is in a general election, that you can micro-target through outreach, which you can do because you have a big army of motivated volunteers and a ton of money from people willing to fucking put it in for it. And they did it. They fucking did it. I saw it, folks. I saw it. And it got results. But what it didn't do was get decisive results. And we know that because whatever you want to say about the DNC rigging it for Biden, at the end of the day, if Bernie had been able to expand beyond the base of Democratic primary voters, it wouldn't have mattered that they coalesced around Biden because he would have been able to have a chunk that could have still overwhelmed them. He was left with this fragment. He had the lowest floor, but he also had the highest ceiling, which is what we found out because it wasn't going anywhere because no one was coming in from outside of it because the door had closed. And now we get these results where we see that, yes, the DNC strategy of appealing to suburban Republicans worked. They moved there. The white people moved. White people with college degrees or associate social status moved to Biden. That happened. And it might have been enough for him to still win. But at the same time, not only do you see a continued drop away in working class white Democratic vote, but what's this? You're seeing a racial dealignment among Latinos here, and even a little bit among blacks, where now that bifurcation is now extending beyond the dreaded white working class. Maybe it's just the dread white working class were like the canary in the coal mine, and because they were privileged, they didn't really get a fair hearing when they started getting pissed off that everything was going to shit around them. Because, hey, they didn't have it as bad as the minorities. But now these people who are supposed to, by the fact that they have it worse than white people as a group, are supposed to inherently band together and against whiteness. What's this? Turns out that the culture shit works on them the same way it works as everybody when all you're doing is clicking channels. And this is what you're seeing. You're not getting this structural bullshit about like what these things mean, what these cultural arrangements are. You're literally just creating two political parties where the message is from one, don't be a pussy, and the other is don't be an asshole. And you got to pick one. And that is a question that is asked on a level that transcends things like race. It gets to like fucking like deep like primal associations with, you know, like concepts like aggression versus cooperation, like deep hardwired stuff. And all that stuff that's supposed to matter shatters. And so we're seeing no coattails. And so even though this might be enough to get Biden across the finish line, what it did not do, and no one can deny this, is that it has denied him the ability to govern, right? We all get that. Everyone understands that, right? Like, no matter what happens here, governing is over. You're going to have a fucking a tied Senate, maybe, with Biden, and a reduced House majority with Nancy Pelosi at the realm. Nothing will happen. And that is all because the coattails don't exist in that concept. And of course, the model of the change people, the Bernie people that I was, well, if you got Bernie in there, see, he would have changed that because he would have got those working class people to vote for their material interests because he would have been engaging it. And I think that would have been true to an extent, and I think Bernie would have won much more decisively than this. But on the question of coattails and creating like a governing ability in this country, it's grim. It's grim. Because what happened in this election is what the left broadly has been wanting to happen for a generation, which is for people to show up, to people to start paying attention. Because the assumption is the mass of Americans, because they have like broad liberal left-wing conceptions of, you know, the working class and the ruling class that they ascribe, that they believe, even if they might not agree on who those constitute, they believe that that is the central tension. They understand vaguely that that's the case because that's why they think of themselves as on the left. Is this so that if you can get participation, you can breach the walls around democracy and flood the zone with people just voting their own interests. But this election, we got that. The biggest turnout in a century. Shattered records everywhere because COVID made it easier for people to vote. So a lot of people who vote casually, which means they don't put a lot of emotional investment in voting, which means they have not ascribed to a lot of the cultural values around citizenship that lead you to wanting to be a member of the Don't Be an Asshole party. They got out there and they're like, yeah, no, don't be a fucking pussy. And I think that if Bernie had been out there, he might have got the same deal because at the end of the day, I honestly think this, and Jeremy Corbyn is why I believe this, is that people don't think that they can change anything with politics. Anything structural. If it's structural, it is by definition not political. That is what we believe, because that's what we believe. And why do we believe it? Because it's what we live. It is just our lived experience, ironically enough. Our collective lived experience is capitalist realism. It is that because we stopped having a class adversarial relationship at the top level of government in the 70s, and that the democratic project has basically been dead since then. And that as a result of that, the two parties don't argue about things like how long should people work? What should be the conditions of their work? What should be remuneration? What should be the standard of living for an American? Those questions are not political to people, even if we talk about them sometimes high-mindedly. And what that means is that at this point, I feel like if you get in front of a bunch of people, casuals, who are going to just come into the polls because it's so easy now, they're going to hear you say, I want to get Medicare for all, and I want to make everybody have free college, just like Corbyn did, because Corbyn got to run a general election where he got to make his message spread in a country where they have a fucking parliamentary system where if he got in power, he could actually have done some stuff because they don't have our stupid fucking constitution. It's a majority rule. And yet, the red redoubt there, the red wall. They went for Brexit because Brexit was more real to them than the stuff Corbyn was promising, because they didn't think he was telling them the truth. And even though some people are going to be disarmed by the genuineness of a guy like Corbyn and Bernie, and that's going to get you some people, it's not going to get you enough people. And a lot of people are going to see it, and they're going to be like, yeah. And then they're going to go back to the big questions, which are cultural and identity-based. And I think one of the big reasons that there's a disconnect here, and that like the political class, and by that I mean literally people who pay attention to politics at all and give investment into their vote, they believe that when they think of a political party, they think of it as a historical entity. And they think of it as having a history of things that it's done. And as having a coherent platform that involves things like distribution of resources. But the thing is, that's only if you learn that shit and keep it in your head when you think about the Democratic Party. For these casual voters who will come in, if there's a breeze, they will be blown into the voting booth. They only see the party in front of them. And the Democratic Party is the party that just says, don't be an asshole, in a wheedling voice. Saying, come on, guys. Do we have to be so mean? Because, as Trump says, Trump's big rejoinder to the kids in cages is, who's built the cages? And the thing is, we're going to have cages. And the question becomes, culturally, are we going to be an asshole about having the cages, or are we going to be a fucking pussy about having the cages? And that's the difference. Liberals say, we got to have cages, but don't be an asshole about cages. Liberals, Republicans say, look, we got to have cages. Don't be a fucking pussy about cages. That's it. Those are the two parties. As people understand them, as cultural signals. Like those things in the older generations, the people that make up the leadership of these political parties and are largely like disproportionately heard in its culture, such that it is its political culture, its self-conscious political culture. They all remember a time, lived in their lives, when there was some sort of ideological coherence and meaning to the Democratic Party that involved material relationship. But people living now, certainly ones who just decided to vote in 2020, do not have that. They see the don't be an asshole party, the don't be a pussy party. And whether you want to be an asshole or a pussy in America comes down to, did you go to, someone say it. Someone say it. College. Thank you. That's it. Boop. Educational attainment. Did you go to the etiquette school? A thing that used to get you entry into a real middle class, right? Because you get a professional degree and it would give you an access to a professional lifestyle. Those are gone, but the attendant social prestige is still there. And so people still go to college and consider themselves part of this thing, even though it doesn't get them anything but the same gig economy job everybody else has. But it changes the way they vote. But not on a material basis, because that's not part of our politics. And then you have the people who in college you learn, you know, hey, we're moving papers around in here. We're muffling all the horrible shit that our system creates, all the blood that we create. Well, we create a bunch of bullshit language that we talk to each other nicely, good phrases, and we raise our pinkies up. We learned this from the British when we talk about how many fucking slave barges we've just moved through the port of fucking Equatorial Guinea. We have acculturated ourselves to the brutality of extraction, of being at the top of a pyramid of human misery. And so we've learned how to kind of let off the steam of the anxiety of living that every day, the horror of it, in the form of liberal politesse. Like it used to be manners, it used to be religion, then it became manners after God died. And that manners used to be, you know, in the old reactionary era, pinky extended, stiff upper lip shit. Manners now need post-60s, mommy, we all love each other, hug box, snowflake stuff, if you want to call it. And so you go through that fire and you get the message, don't be a fucking asshole. Now, the thing is, a lot of guys are going to hear, even going through that system, just because you think, I'm actually going to make money out of this. Like the ones who go into college thinking, hey, I'm going to really get a career out of it. The suckers, in other words, they're going to come out reactionary. Because fuck this, you know what, I want to be an asshole. Because the don't be an asshole thing, it's so awfully condescending and sadistic and contentless. It has no meaning related to anyone's actual lives. It says, keep your voice down. We're trying to study. And what if you don't fucking want to study? What if you don't fucking want to study, bitch? What am I studying for? You used to be able to say, I'm studying to get a job, but now that's not it. I'm studying so I can sit around with another bunch of people and pretend that I'm part of a fucking cognitive elite? Are you fucking kidding me? But one of the things about that was once you're out of that, there's the fucking sunk cost. And it's like, shit, I'm not backing. I'm not going back. I'm not going to be like my dad. No, I'm a good leftist. I'm a lib. And it's going to affect you regardless of what your gender demo is or race or whatever. But if you didn't have that experience, if those manners and the anxiety, the social anxiety related to being aware of things like privilege didn't like seep into you and like become constitutive of your ability to enjoy yourself, which you can only get in those experiences of collegiate brainwashing, then what do you know? You don't fucking give a shit. And that means when someone tells you to keep your voice down and tells you to don't be an asshole, you're not thinking, you know what, you're right. You're thinking, you're lying. You're just saying that to get me to be quiet because you're a fucking selfish asshole like we all are, and you're saying some bullshit about, oh, we're gonna all get good grades on the thing. It's disingenuous. It's a lie. Oh, the cage babies. You built the cages. And it's true. Because the conditions of American politics assume that there will be climate catastrophe, there will be pandemic that will never be stopped, there will be continued economic bottoming out, there will be people killing themselves in greater and greater number, indirectly, there will be just social collapse. And the replacement with just the mere attenuated nerve endings of pure stimulus response. The people who can bury themselves in the internet to find some reason to keep moving forward. Imagine frontier they can walk through into the digital realm while everybody else just dissolves. And we are seeing this with the vote. We're seeing this with the vote. Race is being, we're seeing the poll. Now, the biggest weight, the most dramatic one you can see it is Latinos. And of course people say, those Latino men, it's the machismo. It's like, well, that's kind of true in a vague sense, in the sense that the Don't Be an Asshole party is feminine, culturally marked, and the Don't Be a Pussy party is masculine. And so if that's just down to boys versus girls, if politics is just boys versus girls, and you think you're a guy, well, why wouldn't you pick guys? Unless you wanted the girls to like you. And you only learn that when you're sitting around with the other kids at the fucking tea party in college. So if it's the dudes rock party and the hens party or whatever, I don't know. A woman should name the equivalent of the dudes rock party, because obviously this is not dudes rock. It's awful. It's toxic masculinity. It is. It's awful. It's bad. Its political expression is noxious and awful. The policies it proposes are terrible. But they're the same policies and the same outcomes that the Democrats do. They're just coded differently. And so because Latinos do not experience race in America the way that Black people do, because no one in America experiences race the way Black people do, and the idea that, because we invented racism, through capitalism, but branding Black labor to keep it, trackable in absence of greater technological ability. If they had chips in people's wrist that could blow up if you weren't working enough, they wouldn't need a color system. It was that I'm taking people to the new world. I don't want them to just run away and start a farm with the Indians. It's just a hell of a lot harder to do if you have a completely alien culture and fucking a notifiable color difference that marks you as out of place, if not accounted for. And so, but then we took all the people outside of this, mostly liberal whites, basically created these theories where they listened to minorities, they listened to lived experiences of being a minority, but then they took them and applied them to the only rubric they knew, which is white and Black. And Latinos do not experience race the way that Black people do. And the evidence for it is this fucking election. Think of the way that that Trump guarantees that he will never get, no Republican will get more than 10% of the black vote, right? It doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. He might have done a little better with some black men, but that's the ceiling for, and if you think about it, when you think of the way every other demographic breaks down in this country, that's an insane statistic. Especially when you consider how many black people there are in this country. That's a crazy amount of real estate that they are ceding and cannot even hope to get off the block. Meanwhile, Latinos are fluid. And even though he went hard anti-Hispanic, he went hard anti-immigrant, hardcore anti-immigrant, and that said, oh God, what are they going to do? He actually didn't do that bad. He did a little better than Romney, I believe, with Latinos. And then what's this? He's done even better again. Because all that stuff about the kids in cages, it's not experienced as like that level, at the visceral thing. Like the BLM stuff, like every police killing, I think, it reverberates through the black community in like a shockwave. But like kids in cages, if you're an American Latino, there are so many different things that can mean, from being a fucking Gusano in South Florida to like a fourth generation Mexican American in Texas or something. You're an American, and those kids in cages aren't, and that's deeper. They're not your fucking kids. They're from fucking, they're not, it's not, they're like, they're from fucking El Salvador. I don't know those fucking people. They're not my kin, the way that like George Floyd's death is felt as like a collective attack by black people. And so that means they're not going to respond to race the way black people did, which means they're not going to be the malleable mass that the college-educated elite that make up the Democratic Party can mold to their liking. Oh no, what's this? It's packing away. Oh no, our stuff's only working on the college-educated ones. Oh shit, what about the rest of them? Oh no, oh what's this? The society's breaking down along class lines. Oh look, they're going away. And what is that? They went to the Dudes Rock Party. They fucking exiled themselves to the Dudes Rock Party because that's what they care about. They care about dudes rocking. They don't care about some Mexicans in Mexico hate Central American immigrants. What the fuck do you think American Mexicans, people who are American, remember, none of these people are going to get an ICE raid. By definition, they're voting in an American election. And so they see this as like, look, I'm in America. I have a barbecue. I don't want some fucking guy who speaks like what, some Central American Indian language coming up to me and taking my fucking grill or like asking me to wash my windows. Fuck that. We got to have a barrier. How do we have a barrier? We have a fucking wall. We're going to have wall. We're going to have cages. There's going to be kids. Oh God, don't be a fucking pussy about it. And of course, like the black thing is going to be a little different though. You're not going to see that happen because part of that dudes rock lifestyle we're talking about involves explicitly, in a way it doesn't with any other racial group in this country, not being black, not like as specifically like blood quanta stuff like liberals do, like the 23andMe psychos who it's like, well, look at my fucking thing, I'm 1/16 something, and that means that I should be the chair of African American fucking studies or whatever. They're like, no, it's an Americanism, it's an American nationalism. And that means that, like, Latinos, yeah, look like, but black people, no thank you. And that means that you're going to see college-educated blacks get even more dedicated to being Democrats, and non-college-educated blacks not voting GOP, just not showing the fuck up. And why the hell would you? Why would you care about this fight between these two things when you have no investment in the fucking outcome, because you are not invested in the state project to the degree that they are, because they're not aware of their collective exploitation and their collective alienation, which they know, which is class-based, that is based not on income but is on class and is disproportionately felt by African Americans, but is uniquely among African Americans felt collectively, whether you like it or not. And some of them don't like it and become Republicans, but that's a minority. Most of them are going to see this shit and check the fuck out. And what that means is that the only reason that Democrats ever had for thinking that they were going to be able to like take over politics in time to stop this country from just burning to death in the fucking lava field is that, well, the demographics. Look, we're getting younger and we're getting browner. Browning of America. But the thing is that browning of America is not a blackening of America. The population of the U.S. black population, I believe, is decreasing. Or if it isn't, it's steady. It's Latinos. It's Asians. And if they can be melded into the dudes rock, keep the noise down party structure, you're going to see the emergence of two political parties that are going to fight what appears on paper to be a class war between rich people and poor people. And it's going to be fought on those terms. And the Republican Party will, to some people, look like it is now the party of the working class. But, what's this? Working class just means culture bullshit. Oh, no. It's completely, it doesn't, like, because we've assumed everything else. Because, remember, while all this is going out, the gears are turning. The system is pumping out the only outcome it can do, which is profit extraction through stripping and destruction and undermining of the American fucking economy from the inside out to get the last bits of fucking profit out of this thing as the rate of profit sinks. And because we've created a situation where our ruling class is this like lumpen billionaire class of non-self, like class unconscious rich people, which is not supposed to be a thing. Like we have literally a lumpen ruling class in this country. And when I say this country, I mean the whole Atlantic sphere, like the NATO sphere. That it's a fucking it's just a bunch of it's the thing that government structures exist to prevent from happening, which is the direct competition of capitalism reducing and destroying all profit and surplus instead of allowing it to be hoarded by some. That's what government's supposed to correct, but we've created a system now where because politics died in the 70s, it's been dissolving. And so now there's no way that it can respond to changing conditions because changing conditions were the only thing. It was the only temperature gauge we had. Things got worse. Pressure built up. You had fucking steam rising and you had to address it. But that fucking, the monitor's broken now. And it just steams off into culture war. And so that means that if we do get this like big realignment where it's like a working class Republican Party, which I think honestly is inevitable probably, it will be totally devoid of any meaningful connection to a working class project that has any meaning, any hope. And when I say meaning, any hope of creating the conditions to transcend the contradictions of capital and move to another fucking stage of human development. Because that's the only question anybody should be asking about politics. Is like, do these conditions allow us to actually build a future? And the answer here is no, it cannot. So the election's still going on. It's actually the exact nightmare scenario that people were worried about, right? This was the liberal and left wing, for in many cases, worry about this election. Because of the nature of the ballot collection process, you've got these states where Trump is up on election night. But Coates going to take a long time. He's going to declare victory. And he's going to call on his supporters to go out and commit and carry out a coup on his behalf and stop voting. Then his judicial goons will back him up. And what is actually happening? Trump is doing everything that everyone said he would do. He's not taking the high road. He is saying the stuff that before the election people said was going to cause a civil war. I want people to go back and maybe I even said this because, like I said, I didn't realize until I realized, you know? I hope I didn't. Thinking back to this stupid issue, I feel like I was pretty consistent that I thought this was all fucking horseshit. But maybe I feel like at this point, if I gave it any credit, I feel like I oversold the case. But honestly, I felt like I had to give some credit or people just wouldn't listen to you. They were like, well, this is so absurdly ridiculous to think this isn't a real threat, that we don't live in this country with the fascist police state and the Proud Boys and the Nazis in the street. You can't tell me that there isn't a real threat. And so I felt like I had to fucking like extend just a bone to even like be able to get a conversation going or get people to like listen. But now it's like, okay, the barn door is closed because this is the scenario. Think of someone before on election night who said, what if this happens? They would say he will do a coup. That's what they would mean. Or there'd be some sort of fighting in the streets, and blood in the streets would be the number one thing they would say. They would say violence. How it would come out, they might not say, but they would say violence. What have we actually seen? Where are the Proud Boys that were told to stand back and stand by? Where are the militias, the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers and the Promise Keepers and the Patriot Prayer Boys? Where are they with their guns? The biggest crowds I've seen are a bunch of fucking chuckle-headed, parrot fuck, Jimmy Buffett concert going motherfuckers doing the fucking YMCA in a parking lot. Some guys in fucking Pennsylvania they went there to protest and they broke out a fucking karaoke machine. And what does this lay onto? It lays onto a situation where all these issues that we've wrapped so much importance around, like this is titanic battles about the future of the race, are identified as sports fandoms. These people get together, they basically have a tailgate party. And you see videos of some dorks chanting, and they're like, this is voter suppression. And it's like, yeah, sure, the intention is bad. These are people who don't respect you and don't think that you deserve rights. And yeah, all that stuff is true. But what is their power to enact their world? What is their power to enact that world? Their power to enact that world is their vote. And then what else, though? What else? What else, really? Besides posting, maybe, if they go on Facebook, besides amplifying things and getting other people to vote, maybe, what are they doing? Being obnoxious to people in viral videos? Are they actually applying any power that's on their consumer interactions in society to make the world more racist? I mean, some of them are doing, like, hate crimes, and some of them are doing shootings, and once again, that's terrible and awful, but you have to fucking put those things in perspective, or else why aren't you a psychotically tough on crime conservative? Because if, like, one life lost to violence is, like, evidence we have to drop everything, then you're Dick Cheney. Things have to be put in perspective. That was how terrorism worked. People in the fucking Bush years were saying, my God, terrorism, at the end of the day, what's the big deal? People would say, my God, you're saying you would allow a terrorist attack in American soil? It's like, well, it wouldn't be ideal, but, like, if the cost of not having that is this awful fucking war, like, I'm sorry, maybe we take some. They would say, that makes sense. But in this case, in this specific instance, no. Any violence carried out in the name of politics, we have to orient our entire politics around stopping. And I'm saying that was a big part of whatever the fuck kind of campaign we just saw in the last 4 years. And what did it accomplish? And what was the real enemy? Because the moment is this. Nobody fucking tell me, oh yeah, well, you know, they're waiting for their moment. This is the moment. This is literally the scenario that everyone was talking about. This is it to the T. Everything has gone as they have said. And what has happened? Guys like Rupert Murdoch said, oh yeah, Arizona's for Biden, and fuck you, we're not going to reverse the call. What did Mitch McConnell say? He said, you know, there is actually a difference between, you know, counting votes after a vote and recounting and getting new votes. It's like, just keep counting them. They're all regular votes. What about the fucking federal judiciary that he's stacked with his fucking loyalists? One after another, these judges are saying this is a fucking bullshit case. And the cases don't even have like they're too incompetently put together. Jared Kushner literally was like Googling how to steal election on election night. That's how much planning had gone into this, fucking trying to see, hey, is there a guy like James Baker? Can we find like a incredibly powerful and influential political fixer who's been, you know, right in the top levels of American politics for 30 fucking years? Oh shit, no, all those guys are tired and their dipshit kids are running everything now. Oh fuck. Because yes, there are millions of crazy Trump supporters, but their craziness is the way that they're crazy about being a fucking football fan. And they'll certainly go out and do things in public to fucking register that fucking, the belief, because that's how you reinforce the emotional connection you have to the idea of yourself as a fan of something. But are you going to risk your fucking life at the end of the day? Because how many, I mean, in Europe, it's one thing with the soccer, where it's actually very political, like, you know, in a cultures where political life actually had some, like, teeth to it as recently as World War II and afterwards. Even if it's dissolving now there as well as it is here. But what, like, we have riots sometimes when a team wins, but some guys turn over a car, that's it. There's no huge apocalyptic confrontations with the cops. There aren't fucking deaths. There isn't any real confrontation with the state. There isn't any kind of ethnic pogrom. It's just a spontaneous expression of people's overpent emotional connection to a pseudo event that they're participating in virtually. And that's what they are doing. They're doing what you would do if your team won or lost, or I guess waited for a really, really long instant replay call, and you really cared. That's what we're dealing with. And what that means, the good news, people said it was really black pill yesterday. I don't think that's the case. I think black pill is some fucking online cope shit like everything else. It's part of the culture of like having an identity and a take that like takes the place of asking yourself what you're going to do about politics. Because like I have said, you have to make politics part of your life as a citizen and as a family member and as a friend and as somebody who lives in a fucking community and in a country, because you are a human being. But the actual content of that is determined by your experiences, not a black pill. Oh, I took the black pill, now I get to game all day. If you're gaming all day, you're deadening the thing in your soul that says you should try to make things better. Black pill it's a pill. It's a Zoloft. You're going to have to answer those questions. People say it's black pill because it tells them you can't find it here. And that is a black pill. That's the truest black pill, because you're saying this thing that I have identified with as like a zone of political participation and engagement and like building my character and ethic as a human being and building real like actions around my reputed mental values that I hold, the things that give them texture and reality, that cannot provide me with a political meaning. Well, then political meaning doesn't exist. By definition, because that's the only place you can get it. And that's one of the reasons we're in this mess, is because people feel that in their guts. But it's not fucking true, because even if it's not electoral, and it might be, there will still be something you can do that turns into politics if enough people do it. And I know that that's not great. I know that sounds like maybe some anarchist bullshit. It really isn't. It's just an acknowledgement that this thing is not the society. I mean, I know that's cliche. It's literally the Matrix, but it is. It's like, it is the Matrix. There's a reason that people love talking about the Matrix, because it is just a perfect fucking metaphor for the experience of this. And yet we have all accepted, it's like, yeah, I know it's the Matrix, but. I know it's the Matrix, but. And I would say that for the last 4 years, I don't blame anyone for thinking, I know but it's the Matrix, but. Because we didn't know what was working. We didn't know what was happening. We only knew that everything was up in the air. We were trying to figure it out the only way we knew how, which was to consult the only forum, the only public engagement that most of us have, which is the online space. And we went looking for answers. And that was the only place we were only going to be able to find them there. So it was totally made sense to do it. And I think things were learned by doing that. Things were built that had material consequences. But now is the time to recognize what's going on. Okay, there is no but. The good news, though, is that there is another place that you can try to build Zion. And that means you have to build institutions, and you have to find institutions that connect to the people you know and who you have trust with and who you can build outward with, like, say, labor unions and things like that. Not spontaneous street demonstrations. That's what they're doing right now. That's what everything has been for the past 4 years. Spontaneous personal expressions of an overflowing sense of a need to politically define oneself, driven by the trauma and horror of the living in the moment and feeling like you're a political subject. But our conception of ourselves as political subjects is illusory. And so when we go out and we perform political identity through demonstrations, riots, karaoke protests, it is inherently limited by our limited ability to recognize, to coordinate action. Because without coordination, the action does not reverberate upward and reinforce. It, like anything driven kinetically, will hit friction and momentum will be slowed. And eventually the water pours out of the cup and it just drizzles away into the fucking drain. And that's like, and those eruptions can be very powerful and have short-term be like, traumatic and involve death and violence and these horrible narratives and real trauma and horror. But they are not the building blocks that people think they are. They are not the steps in an ascension that people think they are. They are random, they explode, the ripples go out, and then the fucking waters still until another eruption comes out. Because none of these are building anything beyond the sedimentary layer that over time might reach a tipping point, but I think definitively, I'm sorry, it has not been reached yet. And I think this, I think the way this is going, the way this recount is, or whatever the hell, count is going, the way that there's just none of the stuff anyone was worried about has come to pass. and the way that we are just sort of suspended in like an eternal election night, I think that we are in for like a weird, it's weird. I don't know how to put it. Like, we're not going to get an exhalation. We're not going to get an exhalation, but we're not going to get any catharsis. It's going to be a ruined orgasm, just an eternal edging. Like a election day that never ends. But I think because that level of tension can't be sustained, I think the tension will turn into something else. Like the emotion can't go away, but it will mutate. And I think like all that, the anxiety is turning into something else. Because I don't know how the hell we see this totally muted response, this non-apocalypse come out and happen in front of us, and not respond by lightening up somehow, which is, I think, why Biden won, honestly. Permanent election day, baby. Just suspend it, because, like, this was supposed to be the apocalyptic confrontation. We were going to banish evil, or evil was going to roar its head at us. One way or the other. Like, if you're a conservative or a liberal, that's what you thought. BLM, Antifa will be at your preschool, feeding your child halal meat, or you know, the Proud Boys will be bursting into your local health food store and calling everyone soy based, and you'll be able to do nothing about it. But that's not going to happen. And there's not going to be a, you know, you're not going to get your chance. Because like I said, both urges are inherently sadistic. It's like, yes, you're scared of being punished, but you're also excited about inflicting punishment. So that's the lure of it. That's like the emotional edge of it that makes it enjoyable. The reason people do it, because obviously you don't have to. And we're going to have to find a new sort of, I guess we're going to have to change the channel and switch genres. You know, election day is going to go on, and now it's no longer the, like the big budget apocalypse movie. It's no longer the Roland Emmerich end of the world movie that we were all in until election night. It's like, I don't know, some sort of comedy type situation. I don't know. We'll find out. It'll be funny though. It's just going to be this thing. The thing I'm looking forward to is hopefully the need to like assert culture. I hope that goes away, but honestly, I'm a little worried that because a lot of people are going to take the election to mean, wow, there's more racists out there than we think. And so many more minority racists than I thought existed, especially since I didn't think minorities could be racist. Oh boy, I might have to go. You know what we need to do? We need to get rid of all this anti-white or anti-minority sentiment, all this racism. We need more strident cultural hectoring for people to not be racist. We're going to have to hit the accelerator. But honestly, I feel like without Trump to goose people towards that, like as you know, a market incentive, it's going to wane, and we're going to see some more fun programming. As Will said on the show we just recorded, they're bringing back Entourage, The Man Show. We're going to have all the fun, like Bush era knuckleheaded hijinks. There's going to be no more anxiety cartoons. Everyone's going to just sort of get 70s about it. Like if that was like a 60, if that was supposed to be like a 68, you know, national annus horribilis, then Biden's going to be like that 70s come down. That 70s come down, where everybody just turned into hedonists, and that means more fun, more entertaining entertainment. Stuff that doesn't have to, that does not. Stuff that is not marbled with politics, like cut with politics to make up for the lack of entertainment value. Like, I think that's the best way to think of political content in modern art. The stuff that, you know, that the Gamergate people hate. wokeness in culture, specifically television programs and stuff like that. As I have said, as capitalism is totally marketized entertainment. All right, folks, how you doing? So I know that a lot of people have said after my post-election stream, when I laid out the case for the incurable deadlock between two purely culturally effective political parties that cannot be resolved by any appeal to material conditions, that that's black pill, and that's doom scrolling, or whatever that means. And especially since I just kind of ended with, if something comes, it'll come from below, and I can't say what it is. It's like, goddamn, that's a fucking kick to the Goonies. What? And while I still can't say how it'll happen or who will be participating in it, because that's going to have to occur in the moment, I do think now, having thought about it a little bit, that I have an idea, a sense of what the general shape of such a thing would be. So I could lay it out and give it a description of how I think something might emerge that people could keep an eye out for and involve themselves with if it comes into their view personally, not something that imposed about from me or something that exists now, that's for sure. But like just structurally, just to give people something to think about while they're trying to tend their own garden without getting too doom scrolled or whatever the hell. So let's go to the election. Let's start there. Looks like Biden has won. Looks like the threat of the Trump coup literally did just turn out to be him asking someone else to do it, and everyone being like, "Nah, things are fine. We would not like to risk either our lives in the form of like his supposed shock troops who are going to come and flood the zone and initiate the day of the rope, or their careers in the form of the people at the top of the political and judicial structure." And you might say, well, you silly person, like they have no consequences. I don't think that's true, considering how it wasn't close enough for that to be the case. It's not a Florida Gore Bush situation. There was no room for a real grab that would have been normalizable, maybe. Not something that the snake could digest. And so it all pivoted away. So we're getting Biden. And I know a lot of people are breathing a sigh of relief. And some people are pointing to everybody who is breathing a sigh of relief and saying, aha, you cuck. You said you could say all you want about how you didn't like Biden and you weren't voting for him, but you are rooting for him. And that's the same thing. You're secretly, just through your discussion, the way you framed them, you're brainwashing your audience to vote for Biden. You fucking cuck. I knew it. And as to that, I say fair play. Because if the Democrats are the don't be an asshole party and the Republicans are the don't be a pussy party, I will admit, at that cultural level, I am a member of the Don't Be an Asshole Party, or otherwise known as a pussy. I fit the demographic. I went to fucking college, a middle-class white kid, went to college at the right time, had the right combination of life experiences to connect to the college experience in a way that conditioned me towards having certain social views about cosmopolitanism and things like that. And I know that those are, and I know that those are real issues with real policies related to them, police funding, and you're talking about racial justice or something like that, and, immigration, that those all connect to real things with real consequences. But for me, they are felt affectively. They are felt emotionally. They're not really part of my material interests because I'm a white male. But I know it's an asshole to just let people get exploited and racist and done racism on. And fair enough. I cop to that. I have those views because that part of the conditioning I've kept because it's not people like the new theory is like those set of affects are like neoliberalism. They are the cultural architecture of the broad cosmopolitan point of view, which is contrasted with the parochial point of view that is manifested in the don't be a pussy Republican Party. Those are the people who didn't go to college and absorbed those things, or went to college and rejected those things. And I'm not one of them, so I am fucking rooting for Biden. I'm sorry. I was. Cop to it. Although I have to say, though, I have absolutely no faith that this is going to be a better outcome than Trump having won re-election. In fact, I think there's a very good chance it's a worse outcome. I mean, nothing to be done about it. There was never anything to be done about it by any of us, to be realistic. But when I look at the next 4 years, the way this vote happened, I really do see no reason to have any thought other than the divided government means that nothing of any consequence is passed beyond like the very merest like minimal amount of recovery money and such, and that we will allow ourselves to go through a second Cleveland term response to a crisis where we just sort of allow it to continue without any kind of significant government intervention. If we get any big legislation, it will be something like entitlement reform, the grand bargain that McConnell is waiting and salivating at the prospect of passing, in which with a Democratic House led by Nancy Pelosi, instead of a fucking crazy group full of Tea Party psychos under Boehner who wouldn't take a deal when it was given to them by Obama, they might actually be able to get it. Culturally, all the wars that we think are over are only going to get more intense and more annoying. I mean, I think that the particular keening whir of them will go down because Trump's not there to like keep the liberals psychotically activated. But just the general drift is going to ratchet towards more conflict, and there's going to be more police violence, and there's going to be more demonstrations about police violence, and there's going to be more political violence in general that people are going to spectacleize and assimilate into their political view, and it's going to harden things. And that means that those newly introduced Republicans who showed up, the ones who aren't just going to stop paying attention, are going to become more convinced of their Republicanness. But more importantly, all of the people who came up to stop Biden are in the midterm going to stop paying attention. You'll see another red wave like in 2010, and then a failure to recover at all from the collapse, unlike the fake recovery we got under Obama that was then covered with Obama's personal charisma and like narrative power to shape our relationship to the government. Just Joe Biden's rickety skeleton presiding over all like a fucking danse macabre. He gets destroyed by whatever comes after Trump. Donald Trump Jr., John Taffer, My Pillow guy, maybe Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley. I mean, it's going to be a battle royale, but whoever it is, it's that. And then you get locked in like a full suite of anti-democratic things that legitimately limit franchise and that allow for the full like securitization of life, the full privatization of life, for the coming breakup, into the techno-cantons and the dissolution of central authority, which is the end game of that faction of capitalism's political expression. And the Democratic Party will be unable at every point to stop this because, as I have said, their drift cannot be reversed. They can only double down on what they have been doing. Like you see it. Trump won because America's more racist than we thought. Well, we're just going to have to scream more about racism then. Okay, that guarantees that all those people who voted for Trump in 2020 because they think that's a bunch of pussy bullshit talk are going to double down on it. And meanwhile, all those working class people you're hoping to bring into politics, they're going to see you screeching and howling, and they're going to mostly tell you to shut the fuck up because they didn't go to finishing school. And meanwhile, the Democratic Party will just be the party of college-educated professionals. And the problem with them is that they don't stay in big parts of the country that are demographically rewarded with congressional representation and political influence. Places that make up 270 electoral votes and that are where people are, where two senators can be elected by a couple 100,000 people. They leave those spots and they go concentrate in already dense urban areas and contribute to already lopsided political victories that mean that their influence over legislation is basically non-existent. Those people in the middle, those are the people who are left over. Those are the older folks. Those are the ones who didn't go to college or came back from college and said it was a bunch of dumb bullshit and didn't go off to seek their fortune in the big city. And they will just be Republicans. And that means you will not even be able to get to 270. It doesn't matter how many votes you win by in the popular vote. You'll never get another fucking electoral vote victory. And you'll never be able to get rid of the Electoral College either. And the response will only be to double down on identity because that's all that exists. And it'll all that exist for Republicans too. It's a mirror image thing. Like they will be doubling down on identity. Like all during the Trump administration, people have been complaining about how the Democrats and leftists in general are talking about identity too much. So was Trump to a different group of people. And the issue is that for the non-college educated, when you talk about those issues, it redounds to the benefit of the don't be a pussy party, because don't be a pussy is a more visceral and understandable reaction to this kind of stuff, because you have not learned the undergirding ideas. And in fact, a lot of these people say you should never have to tell anybody those, because it's not their job to educate you, meaning that you're guaranteed to hear this shit, have it bounce off of you and say, yeah, these guys should shut the fuck up. So, I mean, that's a bad case. And it undermines, hilariously, the only case you could have made for Biden, which was harm mitigation, right? You can't make an ideological case for voting for Biden, that he's going to make anything better. And you can't, and in his case, you couldn't even have made a harm reduction argument, in my opinion. But of course, the harm reduction argument was in the process. It was in the assumption of, well, we're going to take all these voters in this crisis election, and they're all going to vote for Democrats, and we're going to get a blue wave that gives us the Senate. And yeah, we have the filibuster, but hey, we'll be able to get rid of the filibuster. And I know we don't think it's going to happen, but it could. And just the prospect of that fills them with this idea that there's possibility. And they convince themselves that that's what they're voting for when they vote for Biden. But what they get is the result of this party presiding over these conditions, which is college-educated people basically being guilted by the TV and like their fellow college-educated people into getting rid of the bad orange rude man. Many of them, if they're wealthy enough, sticking to voting Republican down ticket because they're still class conscious along those lines, and they know that their interests are in low taxes, since that's basically what the government does. Low high taxes, what else does it do? That's kind of it. Because everything else has been pushed off the fucking table as a possibility, as an intervention that the government can do into the market. And they're either going to be doubling down on that cultural shift or say, well, Trump's gone. Now I've normalized Trump, so nothing's going to shock me anymore, and I'll just vote Republican again. You'll have those younger, ideologically committed Democrats who are either, class traitors, liberal class traitors who think that they're on the side of the downtrodden, even though the Democratic Party is a capitalist party as integral to the maintenance of capitalism and its exploitative system as the Republicans are, but they don't think of it that way. They think they're the party of the downtrodden because they're the party of minority views and minority rights against the oppressive majority. Like, that's what left means. It doesn't have anything to do with distribution, because, once again, distribution is not on the menu. But those people will be concentrated in these fucking cities. And that means they'll never be able to exercise power over the federal government, which means as capitalism gets more savage and extractive, and social cohesion and social obedience are undermined, the techno-surveillance machinery of control will be instituted by the Republican Party, essentially, which means it probably will have like explicit racial character to it. Now, say the Democrats win, though. Like, this is the real grim shit, is that say you break out of that somehow without I don't think you could, but if you could break out of that somehow without changing the undergirding reality that the Democrats are not a working party, they are a workers' party, they're a capitalist party. If you could somehow get them to winning, get them to power in an event of a crisis, all you're going to do is the cliche joke about rainbow painted nose cone predator drones. It will be the violence will be maybe less distributed by explicit racial categories, but it will be as oppressive and stratified along class. So, like, there's not even really a harm reduction case for Trump, because it all ends badly. Because say they somehow parlay a bad Trump response in the second term to COVID to, like, people just kind of shrugging their shoulders, be like, things are so bad and these are the only options, I guess we'll give them a shot. And then they will just be presiding over catastrophe from the point of view of stabilizing capitalism at the expense of us. Like Chuck Schumer saying, people are killing themselves because we're evicting them. Let's give cops the power to detain them if they show evidence that they want to self-harm. That will be the Democratic response to crisis, instead of, build a wall and lock up these these immigrant children, it'll be like a little drone buzzing over your head that'll blow your brains out if you frown too many times. But it will be the same essential machine for the same essential purpose, pulling the last fucking marrow out of the bones of the system before it collapses. Now, once again, this is long, long time frames, but if we're talking about a political party and like the relationship between political parties over time in presidential elections, we're talking long time scales. And we all know that the time scales, geologically and ecologically, are getting narrower. So I'm not saying in anyone's lifetime, even those listening to this, but in generations, this will be the trajectory either way. And as I have said, that cannot be changed from within itself because of how it's structured. Because there is no class politics that is going to be able to inject itself into the overall dynamic between Democrats and Republicans. Because as I have said, we have now reached a point where the end result of the Democrats no longer being the party of material advancement for the working class or the downtrodden or whatever. For 40 years, the Democrats ran this country basically, uninterrupted, even with Eisenhower and Nixon in charge. The Democrats ran this country because they went every 2 years out and said, we're the party of a bigger paycheck. After the 70s, they could never do that again. Not in real sense. Not with any kind of conviction behind it, either in policies or in people's memory of their ability to deliver on those promises. So they've had to find something else to stand in for the party of the downtrodden. And because their new constituency was college-educated people who have absorbed ideas about the character of alienation and oppression in this country that have nothing to do with class and everything to do with discrimination along identity axis, that narrative is now the accepted idea of what it means to be a party of the little guy. It's to defend them against unjust oppression that prevents one from fully participating in the market. Like, that's the real crime of racism and sexism and all other of the patriarchal boogeymen. It's not any kind of violence against human dignity so much as violence against the ability of a human to engage in market relationships the way like everyone else does, for one's own personal pleasure seeking, as the Homo economicus libertarian automaton that we're all supposed to be. And the reason the Democrats, I think, are doomed in this dynamic no matter what is that over time, as politics gets louder and louder to deal with the fact that things are going to get worse and worse, there's not going to be a big influx of these college-educated people into the electorate. They're already there. They're baked in. What's going to happen is you're going to have like what happened in 2020, which is a investment by depoliticized, socially reactionary working people because they have not absorbed the manner system that they got in college. And they're going to see the options we have, and they're going to become Republicans. And that means that you will have this situation where the demographic advantage of the Democrats along all axes, except racial, in the case of black people, but even along income, is going to go away. A big chunk of the people are just still not going to be voting at all. They will be deeper into despair. But those who do vote are going to vote with more anger, and it's going to be directed against the people who want them to keep their voice down, even though everything is terrible. I think a good example of the dynamic going forward is, does anyone know the name, what's her name? This woman who was elected in an upset in the Congress, this named Lauren Boebert, the one who owns Shooter's Grill, the QAnon lady, in Rifle, Colorado. Her story is interesting because she has the story of someone who historically would be a Democrat. She was born in Florida. When she was 12, she moved to Denver. She said that she had Democratic parents and they lived in poverty. Her mom was on welfare. She worked at McDonald's and she was 15. She got a GED. She's like a fucking... she got pregnant in high school and dropped out. She got her GED this year. like a real American, like striver. And that background, according to everything we've absorbed, is supposed to make you, a Democrat. But the reason it isn't is because she's white. And so it's like, well, yeah, but she's racist. So therefore, of course, she's a Republican. But the problem is, nobody is just racist for no reason. I know that's what we've been told. The 1619 Project and Tiny Houses Coats have told us that racism is this intrinsic thing to American life. It's a stain. And I would say, like, race distinction is, but racism as in an operating principle that guides your behavior is not. I'm sorry. And I know you're going to say, yes, but at the subatomic level, it's there every moment. It's like, yes, it is. But I also think that when it's at that level, its manifestation isn't really noticeable, isn't worth freaking out about, isn't a thing that you should be tearing your flesh over about. I'm sorry. She's racist for some reasons, but look at her life. You know, we're supposed to use mitigating circumstances when considering people who do bad things. Like, she had a shitty life. She blames people for it. Why is she blaming black people instead of, if she's racist? I mean, maybe she isn't racist. I don't even know. One way, maybe she does just blame elites for why things are bad. But why does she think that it's Democrats? Why does she think Republicans aren't elites? It's because the only thing she's ever known about this party is that it's about this set of ostentatious displays of concern for other people. And that you're supposed to not want anything for yourself, which is, of course, what upper middle class, polite liberals see politics as. But somebody whose life has been, like, bad, somebody who's struggled, somebody who's been in poverty, they're not necessarily worried about how empathic they look to other people because they're trying to fucking survive. And liberals and Democrats don't seem to care about them. So I know that sounds like, oh, he's justifying racism. Oh, my God. Once again, I wouldn't vote for her. She shouldn't be in charge. But if we're talking about people in general, these things carry out over time. And if you take this Boebert woman and you look at her background and you compare her to someone like AOC, and it's like, oh, she's like AOC. AOC also struggled. AOC also worked. She was a bartender. It's like, yeah, but she was also a congressional aide, and she went to fucking Boston College, majored in political science. This is a person who has received the etiquette lessons that you're supposed to. And it's like, look, this Bronx Latina, look, she's a good socialist. Yeah, because she went to fucking college. And if the question is the future going to be sorting the party into the party, sorting people as they come into politics while things are getting worse and worse, into the Democrats or Republicans to fight over it? And it's AOC versus this Boebert woman. Considering how shitty everything is, there's a lot more people in this country who are going to be in Boebert's position than in AOC's. That are going to have the chance to go to college and get a 4-year fucking degree in in political science. So some people are like, why does he keep talking about college like this? There's plenty of non-college educated people in the Democratic Party, and there's tons of college educated Republicans. Of course there is. The reason I'm talking about college is because when we're talking about the electorate in general, we're divided into these demographic groups and then try to analyze their voting behavior, and we put those on top of one another, and it gives us a sense of like what people are, the politically engaged people in this country anyway, what they are politically, what they view, how they view things. And how like the experience of being an American is absorbed, and those are all things that people do feel about. Or those all are ways that people absorb things like college education, things like race, age, gender. Those things, income, all do. But the problem is in America, because we've got, thanks to our ability to spread broadly, or more broadly than historically has been the case, our lucre, after World War II, we created this thing that was kind of non-existent before called the middle class. This lumpen small bourgeois in America, or at least it became lumpen as we got suburbanized and atomized, thanks to media and geographic sorting. What was I talking about? Yeah, so our lumpen middle class, they are the ones who vote generally. So like this is the electorate. This is one of the things that always made fascism, like the question about fascism, sort of interesting, because that's like fascism emerged in the 20s and 30s as a way to counter working class political mobilization, and they did it by essentially mobilizing the lumpen bourgeois, the lumpen lower classes in Germany and Italy. The thing is, in America, there is no left-wing movement among the working class. The working class is politically inert. So it's all an intra-middle-class movement. Like people say, oh, all these young men are turning into Proud Boys. Like, well, yeah, but they're not emerging into conflict with a working class-line conflict. It's just it's a show-off with other college kids. It's other middle-class strata kids. And the reason I think college is so important as the one demographic descriptor, not only because we're seeing things pull towards college very dramatically over the last couple of elections, but because of all those markers we're talking about, college attainment, gender, race, the only one of these that really gets, even income, I would say, the one of these that gets closest to actually pegging someone towards class as it's lived in America is college. Because the thing about class in America is that even though our lives are totally determined by our class is not a lived experience because we are not conscious of ourselves for the most part. Some people are, but the vast majority are not. We do not walk around conscious of ourselves as members of a class. We are much more conscious of ourselves as those other things, gender and racial. But college, having gone to college, marks you as having gone through essentially an ideological car wash. And most importantly, that because basically a ton of working class people's kids went to college after World War II and came out with professional jobs and moved from the working class to this middle class, this lumpen lower bourgeois, that means that a lot of people grew up in middle class homes, means their parents went to college, which means they absorbed college from their parents, and then they went to college, and then they came out, having gone through the ideological car wash. And that means that they're somewhere in this middle class. Like, there are some who are going to jump way up, and like the rich, of course, send their kids to college, but also they're demographically irrelevant. But, some people jump up in income from before what they grew up from. Some people do rise from the working class to go to college. They are the minority, but they do. And then some of them go off to be very wealthy. Some have significant collapse. In fact, the whole generation of these millennials is all kind of nosedived. But they have nosedived back to sort of being in like a income or even working class relationship that is similar to people who didn't go to college, but having gone to college. And the reason that's important is because the experience of going to college creates your conception of yourself as a political subject. Either because you went yourself, your parents did, instilled those things in you, and then you didn't go because you didn't like them, or if you didn't go to college, you absorb culture, because everything that is made to be consumed in the media is made by and for people who went to college, because they are professional, because art is a professional endeavor now. And professional credentials are required for professional endeavors, or were at least traditionally, in our system now, so artists are overwhelmingly going to be people who went to college. And from the point of view of commerce, people who went to college, since they make up this middle class, this is the group of people who are most numerous and have the most money. Because the poor, there's a lot of them, but they don't have any money. And also, how do you even talk to them, since there's very few poor people who make art that is seen by the masses? And the rich, who, yes, they can be owning all these things, and they can have their kids, become actors because they're bored. But, Bill Gates can only see Aquaman so many times by himself, even if it doesn't cost him a lot of his fortune to go see the movie. You need a lot of people watching movies. You need a lot of people exposing themselves to advertising. You need a lot of people watching the shows. So it's all pitched to the middle class. So they're absorbing all these mores too. But the experience so everyone who is politically active, is what I'm saying, is that way because of their exposure to the psychological regimen, to the value system that is created by college. This is what Moldbug called the cathedral, and it's real. It's real. But the thing is that it's assumed that this thing exists to make people Democrats. And while it is true that that is the intention, I would think, of the majority of the people who make up the collegiate structure, that is not the full purpose. It creates political subjects. It creates people who see themselves politically. And now the people within it want to create Democrats, but because the experience of college is not, it's not a factory, it's a bunch of individuals going into it, all of them with individual life experiences, individual backgrounds, individual personal lived standpoints, whatever the fuck, however you want to put it. And that means that they're going to respond to these things in unpredictable ways. So that while college in this cathedral makes Democrats on purpose, it also by accident makes almost as many Republicans. Because they go to college, or they have absorbed college in their media, grow to detest those values, and then decide to hold the other values, the asshole values. Because what you learn in college is the don't be a pussy worldview, which is cosmopolitan, which is worldly, which assumes equality of all individuals, the equality of rights of all people, and the necessity to create some sort of social justice. Like, that is really it. And a lot of people absorb those views and think, yes, that's good. A lot of people, and I think that broadly, those are correct in abstract. The problem is that they are not, as they're encountered in college and in the culture produced by college, they are turned into this brittle list of personal virtues that are expressed through concern, not through actual policies that are going to help anybody. Like, that's the key part about this, is that this soul washer that we built to send people through and have them come out valuing, diversity and all these things, is in a system where you're literally telling them at the same time that you're telling them that there's oppressed people in the world and that it's the duty to make things better for everybody. You're telling them that communism cannot work, that competition competition is like the essence of human experience. That the economy is a system produced to create like maximal value through people seeking their self-interest in the marketplace. And on top of that, but in that system, in this system that is immutable, because remember, we're not teaching you any Marxism. Like, that's the big joke about right-wingers, is that there's a bunch of Marxists in the academy. Marx has been purged from the academy for decades. Marx is not taught as a serious option. Marx is taught as a historical curio and a dead end that didn't take into consideration such intersecting issues as patriarchy and racism and blah, blah, blah. And that means that when you absorb this stuff, you're not just absorbing equality, you're absorbing that the only problem that is caused by inequality is personal manners, is people being mean to one another. It's not systemic reinscribement of the social exploitation. Because that's not the thing. Remember, society is not a system for exploiting. The society is not the haves sucking the fucking life force and species being out of the have-nots, exploiting those with only their labor to sell by vampire-like sucking their surplus. No, no, no. It's equal exchange of desires across the equal marketplace. And if black people are, or immigrants are disadvantaged, or women, it's because people are mean, and we're going to make them nice. And that's not a viable answer. And people, you either ignore that fact because you're caught up in like the drama of either having experienced those oppressions and wanting to see them corrected, or being, if you haven't, feeling guilty that they're being done on your behalf. And either way, you have an emotional investment. If you don't have an emotional investment, like say you're a white male, you're more likely to go, yeah, maybe they're just less. Maybe they're just not as good. Like, if this is all, if this is an open contest and they're behind, maybe it's because they're shitty. Like, if this is a race, it's like, oh, they're being held back. It's like, I'm not holding them back. I'm seeing them advance. Like, they're all over the place, and yet they're not cutting the mustard. There's no answer for that other than, no, it's because you're racist. That's why they're doing it. It's circular. It cannot get towards actual justice. And so this machine creates these. Going buck wild with a claw this evening. So, been talking since the election about where we find ourselves, and specifically how we find ourselves now with a politics that is absolutely sterile and frozen in a signifying war of a battle of symbols, a ballot of symbolic orders that is totally detached from any greater political project that impacts the distribution of resources, the direction of the economy, the direction of the civilization, the meaningful machinery of life. It is a fully detached puppet show. And a big reason for that is that the Democratic Party is now becoming and is on an, I think, unstoppable trajectory towards fully embodying the role of a political party for college-educated Americans who will be voting to uphold a certain standard of public morals and etiquette. And that as a result of that, the Republicans, they basically have done what the Republicans have wanted them to do when the Republicans started by building their own party of cultural grievance in the 70s and 80s, as when the great crisis began in capitalism and the rate of profit began to fall, and the labor's back was broken and upward mobility stopped. Both parties had to tell a story, and the Democrats, because of their historic association with egalitarianism, got off on just being the party of the little guy for a long time because their commitment to social progress masked a lack of commitment to economic redistribution, and that got them through the door. The Republicans didn't have that. They were always the party of business. The cultural grievance that was accumulating as a result of the social transformation and ferment of the 60s, but was not assuaged by any more upward economic advancement, which has been what had soothed all previous social upward, social shifts. You essentially buy people off for having their folkways fucked with, like racism and sexism and all these things. And the thing is that they have a price. Everybody has a fucking price. But after the 70s, there was no more laundering it off. And the thing is, that wasn't a bad thing. That's part of creating a liberal subjectivity that can then, create class solidarity that can transcend racial, and gender distinctions. So the Republicans were able to pitch themselves as a party that would address the defense of these cultural institutions, even though their politics, just like the Democrats, necessitated the continuing destruction of those values through the application of market forces and the marketization of all life, which was the bipartisan consensus of both parties and has been since the 70s. And the Democrats, for a long time, they were able to sort of pivot away from a lot of those unpopular things with certain people. They were popular with some audiences. They were less popular with others. And the people who it wasn't popular with were more located in places that were electorally significant, so they had a disproportionate weight. They were able to say, don't worry, I know that's bad, but look at all of what we can get you. We can put more money in your paycheck, just like FDR and LBJ did. But the thing is, they couldn't. All they could do was NAFTA. All they could do was bailing out the banks. All they could do was kicking everybody out of their houses so that Goldman Sachs could buy them back at a pittance and make them renters again. Pauperizing people. And I think in the Obama years was what fused us into a situation where we have a political party that is now entirely identified in the public mind with social advancement and nothing else. And the Republican Party is fine, because they were always just the party of social regression. All the economic stuff was mostly coffee table nonsense for their more pretentious members, their bow-tie dipshits. And of course, it was all just a way to give a media gloss on what was going to happen underneath the hood, which was the same machinery of neoliberal exploitation that the Democrats were presiding over, without any serious debate about the actual operating mechanism of the American political economy. And so the Democrats essentially, when fractured against themselves, when their commitment to economics and their economic egalitarianism and their commitment to social egalitarianism, when the piston that drove them seized up because they were no longer able to offer economic egalitarianism, all they could offer is more and more social egalitarianism, which creates a greater and greater degree of social reaction. And the only thing that could break that tie in the favor of progress is some sort of material politics. But as it stands, that engine, that inertia, tie goes to capital, and therefore tie goes to Republicans, the #1 most enthusiastic party of capital, which means everything will drive toward the Republicans eating all politics, because they will be the most attuned with the mechanisms of control of the economy. Now the liberals, though, think they have a winner because they think they've got all of the rich people now, which means they can buy all the ads in the world. And they're like, buying ads is what it's all about. But now we know the ads are reaching people, and I think the ads are reaching people because more people voted this time. More people voted, even though there's less of a ground game in the general election campaign than there's ever been. All air, an entirely media campaign, basically. Internet and television and shit. And it helped drive this highest turnout in a century, 66%, which of course still is abysmal in a democracy, but still very high, and proved that people are paying attention to this. But they are not seeing what the people making these ads are seeing, because they do not have the screen of ideology that they obtained when they went through the ideological car wash of going to college. And so they're going to head towards the more visceral politics of the Republican Party, because the virtues that are supposed to be wrapped around the Democratic Party, it must be stressed, they are entirely ornamental. They demand of people that they behave a code of etiquette, because you say it's racism, you say it's all lives matter, but it's about, Black Lives Matter, and it's about abortion and stuff. If you look at the trajectory of America, if you look at our trajectory, can you really tell me that the Democrats are intervening in any way against any of those things? Or do they just want to promote a culture where you pretend to care about them? And if you're not invested in the college thing, the idea that if you get smart, you will deserve to live, basically. You will have an interior life. That means you're a full person and you don't have to work a shitty job. You get to live in the life of the mind. And if you don't get to live in the life of the mind, if life fails you somehow, if you end up having to work in the gig economy, if you end up falling into the working class and away from intelligentsia, well, that's because of capitalism, and now you can fight it. But what tools do you have to battle it? You only have the battle with the tools you learned in college, and those tools are intersectional oppressions and nothing having to do with capitalism. Or capitalism as like a smokescreen for deeper ills. Because remember, going to college is where this is where people get their idea of what it is to be a political subject. Even people who don't go to college get it from college because they get it from the media and educational industry, like K through 12 and then the media. And those things are all stocked by people who go to college. So one way or another, college is screening how is making you understand what these terms mean. And you go to school and you learn to do these things and believe these things. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was talking about how, all right, so because that's the screen, right? That you either go through it personally if you're a member of the middle class who sends their kid to college, or a member of the working class who gets yourself to work your way up to college, or pay for it by just taking out a bunch of loans. Either way, or if you don't go to college but you watch TV and you look on the internet, if any of that happens and you decide to vote, if you decide voting matters in some way as opposed to just checking out entirely, then college is shaping your understanding of how this stuff works. And if you go to college, what happens? That is where, as an American, you discover what it is to have a class. Because while we all live class every day, class is not lived consciously in this country. I have talked a lot about why it isn't. Pringles in a tube is the quick slang for it. The process by which people who were turning into a coherent working class during the early 20th century were distributed across the hinterlands in a process of suburbanization and ghettoization meant to reinforce distinctions, geographical, social, and racial between working people. And the media then filling that role of just denaturing social life away from the surroundings and towards a monoculture that is totally controlled by capitalism. That process creates these depoliticized beings, which is what we are. So college is the lighthouse that is searing it into our lives, because we do not have the experience of a 19th century worker, of living a life of common exploitation in common quarters and exchanging, because we don't have anywhere else to put our energies. We will be, if we're social animals, we're not going to be having a pseudo-social life of interaction with people who aren't actually around us, by watching things, by interacting with people in a way that doesn't build the way social bonds build. You have those bonds, you have those experiences, and it creates an understanding of a common exploitation, a common misery, and a common target for your anger. And that is where politics comes from. We do not live those lives. We live mediated existences where our social lives are totally attenuated. So we do not live through class, even though we are totally determined by class. But class is real. We have a record of it. We have a record of class struggle in this country. If you're a smart person, you recognize it. So when you go to college, you learn, yes, class is real. Yes, here's Marx, here's Engels, here's the history of class struggle. But also look at this. Here's the fall of the Berlin Wall. Here's Tiananmen Square. Here's the Gulag. Here are the philosophical shortcomings of Marx. Oh, you like Hegel, huh? Well, here's a little Karl Popper to tell you about how dialectical materialism cannot be scientific because it's not so falsifiable. Zwoosh! And then, of course, there's an entire economics department to tell you that the undergirding idea of class exploitation is, in fact, gibberish, is snake oil and pseudoscience. The real thing is that we are not social beings who generate social life through interactions with one another. No, we are all individual beings of pure, monadic, random, personal drive, banging off of one another and creating some sort of harmony out of the cacophony of wasteful, total social competition. That's the reality we are in. Hobbes is right. But if you're a smart person, a sensitive person, and you're learning to be sensitive, because that's one of those values that you learn in college, you learn how to keep your voice down, you learn how to consider other people's feelings. Things are bad. Why are they bad, though? Why are they bad? If we can't stop them that way, how can we stop them? Why are they bad? And the answer that comes back is, well, there's this other stuff. There's racism. There's patriarchy. These structures are real because people feel those in their lives. You live life through the lens of gender. You live life through the lens of race, because it actually does structure people's responses to you in a way that life in a capitalist system where all labor is diffused and the experience of laboring is diffused, and the experience of processing your life is diffused by media away from interactions with other people at all, you're going to go, yeah, that makes sense, because I see racism in my life. I see it in my media. I see it. I've seen it. I've experienced it. I've seen gender oppression. These things are real. And so you get out of that factory now, knowing you want to get things better, maybe even understanding that capitalism is in some way the thing responsible, but essentially, though, because of your emotional connection to these other categories and these other wrongs, you will always end up, when it comes to the question of how do we move forward, because remember, we're not moving from a common experience of exploitation. We're moving from this system of monads we've turned into those creatures that they turned us into. And so we bounce off one another. And so all we have is what is within us. We don't have shared experience. So we say, hey, what about this stuff? What about gender? What about racism? And the thing is, those things are real and people experience this. And some people actually experience them, and they are even more invested. And how do you tell them they're wrong? It's impossible, because those things are felt in a way that class isn't. Class is an idea. These things are real in that they are really felt. And of course, the irony is that the class is the real thing and race and gender are the fake things, but that's because they're superstructural. That's the definition of a superstructural element. The way you know how the fucking tube goes into the vent. And that is why there can be no forward progress within this system. And anybody who's telling you that the Republicans are the real party who are really going to do it, oh boy, they're really going to do it. The Republicans are going to be the party of class. Has had their brain melted by being on here too fucking long. because they have looked into the mirror and seen like the grass on the other side, but because they haven't lived there in the psychic space of being on the right, they have no idea that it's a mirror fucking image. What is the difference between thinking, you know, AOC is really going to push Biden's agenda to the right, to thinking, you know, Josh Hawley, he might be anti-right to work and anti-raising the minimum wage, and mostly just talk about he only talks about class issues in terms of pure cultural grievance, and then maybe shaking a fist at China, which is not something the Democrats are hate, or the military machinery is bad about. Fucking Cold War with China is the next engine of the fucking economy. If we're going to have anything, it's going to be military buildup to fucking some sort of brinksmanship with China. But he's really, actually, it comes from the heart for him. You're a sucker. You're looking for an answer here because you don't realize there cannot be an answer found there because you're entranced by it. For some reason or another, this gets you off. And why does it get you off? At the end of the day, because you are in the college sphere. You were a Democrat even if you don't want to be. All these people who hate liberals and hate Democrats are the most democratic and liberal people, ironically enough, because they are committed to the framework of working within this structure and this media paradigm and this pathetic roundelay within this party that cannot be reformed. Both parties that cannot be reformed. A party system that is detached from material politics, thanks to the politicization of the American political subject. We are Pringles in the tube. Obama and Trump, back to back, represented the creation of a thesis and an antithesis of cultural conflict that are now wrapping people around them as we drift towards calamity. With a economic system that, due to a declining rate of profit, is being driven towards maximum profit extraction, which means it can no longer be restrained by the political superstructure that is put around itself, that's supposed to regulate it and keep it from self-destruction. There is no more money left for that. The profit motive overrides everything, which is, of course, the death thing within capitalism. That is why Marx is correct. That, like, Marxism is teleological, and people say that's bad, but I think that his argument that capitalism is doomed is 100% correct, because that drive, whereby once the system hits a critical downward slope in profit, and it needs to marketize more and more of the social structure in order to find it and replace the lost stuff, the political structure that distributes away from crisis, it distributes it with surplus. The surplus is what allowed the New Deal consensus to form and the Fordist Compromise to be made. The middle class, the working class to be bought off. And that's gone. So that means the superstructure is now empty and cracking and collapsing away from just the beating heart of capitalism that will eventually just consume itself. The question is, what intervenes with that? And the thing about Marx is you can never say that he was too optimistic, because it says right in the fucking beginning of the manifesto that class conflict resolves either in the victory of one class or the other, or the common ruin of the contending classes. People forget that because he's talking about ancient societies that all rose and fell, but they all rose and fell within within closed systems, within a greater ecology of a greater biological and ecological biome that didn't contain all of that. This system is now totalized. So when it collapses, there will be nothing to come after. So this is the final, that's the ending of the cycle. Like, that's supposed to be, that is said to be like a contradiction within Marxism, that, you know, he misapplies Hegel by saying that there can never be an end to the dialectical turning. And of course, in a greater sense, there cannot be. But in just the narrow sense of a civilization, of an actual biological species consuming and destroying itself by not being able to regulate its consumption of its surroundings, is totally realistic, in my opinion. It's not even eschatological, really. It's just observational. It's observation of the second law of thermodynamics operating within a closed system, which is what we're dealing with. So if something's going to intervene, it's going to be the working class finding again themselves as a class. I don't think it's going to be through, it might start in America. I don't think it necessarily will. I think that there will be little fires everywhere. And I think that the ability of any kind of coordination and cooperation between the working classes of China and the United States, I think, are incredibly important. Because while there's this like move towards conflict and then eventual merger on one condition or another, at the top of Chinese and American society, there needs to be a corresponding push from both bases towards one another. And this, I think, puts paid to the, in my mind, for all of time, the question of the whole, is the PMC a class contest? Which is now, I think, finally, like, after all the bullshit stripped of it, the real nut of all of these meta-arguments that are consuming people on the online left. And in my opinion, this is a perfect example of an argument that exists to be had and can only be had and can never be resolved. Because it is a classic case where both sides are correct. Both sides are arguing their proposition to a correct end, in my opinion. The difference is that they are not in response to one another. On the narrow question of, is the PMC a class? Is like the cultural, is cultural capital real capital? Is there such a thing now? Has cultural capital transformed the relationship between people between people that we call class, away from means of production and towards a social relationship? And I would say that that question has been resolved, in my opinion, especially by this election. And the answer is yes. PMC, whatever you want to call it, this lumpen bourgeois, petty bourgeois, as I've called it, it's a class. It's a class. It's a class. It's a class. But in a larger way, not within that argument, but within the context that the people are making the argument, the people who disagree with that are correct because it doesn't matter. Because they're a class in a new class structure that is entirely superstructural and only exists for the purpose of wielding political power in the spectacle. And it has no connection to the gears of power, to the means of production, which are driving themselves towards total marketization and asset stripping of the social realm. And the reason, and you'd think like, well, that's pretty pat and easy. Why can't they stop fighting? And the reason is very simple. Because in order to argue that what I just argued and win the larger argument, you have to concede then that none of this fucking matters. That none of your conversations are meaningful in that they are occurring within a sterile political environment where people who are within a self-enclosed bubble, an Eloy-like bubble within the American hellscape, the people inside the little Dublin Zardoz who dance around and just spend their time, they're the eternal beings bored out of their minds, just making up little intrigues to fill their time, like at the court of Versailles. And that means everybody. That means everybody on every point. That means everybody, every fucking stupid ball person owning people with epic class reductionism, as well as every weepy ID poll dipshit who thinks the fucking crystal max are around the corner. It's all entirely contained within that bubble. And you can't admit that because then you've both lost. You're both losers then. There's no way to win.